Threatened. SEAL Endgame, Book 3, by Leslie North. Chapter 1. Instant fatherhood was not all it was cracked up to be, or at least it was not at all what they showed in the media. It was hard. Gage Winters fumbled down the dim hallway, exhausted and frazzled, one fussy 8-month-old tucked against his shoulder while he went to the nursery to fetch the baby's now crying twin. Lord help him. He couldn't remember being this tired ever, even during his most strenuous training as a Navy SEAL. Honestly, he couldn't remember the last time he'd gotten more than 2 consecutive hours of sleep. According to everything he'd read online about kids this age, they should be sleeping through the night and napping during the day. But all that helpful advice didn't apply to 2 traumatized babies, traumatized by their parents' deaths and a sudden change in caregiver. Gage still couldn't stand to think about that moment 2 weeks ago when he'd gotten the awful news that his best friend and his wife had been killed in a car accident. Then had come the realization that he'd been given custody of their children, twin babies. Both those events had changed Gage's life forever, and if he was struggling to process it, he could only imagine how frightening and confusing it was for the babies whose lives had been so abruptly upended. He made his way into the spare bedroom that had now become a makeshift nursery. With one hand securely on the back of little Brennan's head to support him, Gage reached into the crib to scoop up the boy's sister, Maya, with his other arm. There, baby girl. What's wrong, huh? Did you wake up and find yourself alone? You're not, and you never will be. I promise. His soothing tone did little to appease the angry baby, her little face scrunched and red. Gage sighed and carried both kids back to the living room, where he'd been watching a documentary on the Sahara while doing his best to entertain Brennan in his bouncer seat, hoping that the baby would go back to sleep. No luck on that front. Now that both were up, he might as well feed them. Once he'd checked and changed each baby's diaper, he settled the twins in their carriers in the kitchen and then began fixing 2 bottles of formula. It felt like he'd made hundreds of these in the days since he'd received custody of the twins. Figuring out bottles and baby food was a challenge he hadn't expected to face. He was determined, though, not to screw it up. He'd already made enough mistakes in his life already. Now, with 2 little lives dependent on him for survival, he'd sworn never to screw up again. He owed that to Tucker and Christine, the twins' deceased parents. He owed that to the men who died because of his negligence in Afghanistan, too. It didn't matter that he'd been cleared during the investigation, and everyone said there was no way Gage could have known about or prevented the attack. He knew the truth. Deep down, he knew it was all his fault. Nothing he did would ever bring those men back or wipe away his guilt. All he could do was move forward now and do better. Be better. It was a vow Gage lived by. The microwave beeped and he removed the 2 bottles of formula, inserting the digital thermometer to make sure they were both at identical optimal temperatures before screwing on the lids and carrying them over to the table. Right, kiddos, Gage said, holding a rubber nipple to each little mouth before tipping the bottles up slightly once the twins latched on and began to suckle. Their hands reached up and grabbed hold of the bottles as they looked at him with wide eyes. Dinner is served. Or maybe it's breakfast. I don't know at this point. His slight chuckle filled the kitchen as he smiled down at the babies. He'd always imagined having a family of his own one day. He'd just never expected it to happen so suddenly. To say he'd been shocked the day the attorneys had shown up at his door would be the understatement of the century. Gage had just been settling into his life post-discharge from the SEALs. At 28, he was young to retire. But once the debacle on the Afghanistan mission had happened, his heart just hadn't been in it anymore. He'd tried transferring to a desk job at headquarters in Virginia Beach for a while, but pushing papers wasn't for him. So, after 10 years in the Navy, he'd taken an early discharge and come home to Topanga, California, moving into the house he inherited when his uncle Derek passed away. If not for the inheritance, there was no way Gage could have afforded the cost of living here, especially now with the twins to take care of. Plus, he'd yet to find steady work and security, though the job hunt was on hold for now, until he could get the kids settled enough to consider putting them in daycare. Change was his new constant. Brennan jerked his head away from his bottle and stretched, giving Gage a gurgling squeak and sending formula dribbling down the front of the blue sleeper Gage had just changed him into not long ago. Oh well, such was life with babies. Gage laughed as he set one bottle aside to grab a towel, careful to keep an eye on Maya as he did so. Of the two, Maya tended to be fussier, especially when she was hungry, while Brennan was more laid back, at least until he needed a diaper change, or wanted attention, or... Who was Gage kidding? Both babies were a handful, but he loved them just the same. He just managed to mop up Brennan's clothes and toss the towel aside when a knock sounded on the front door. Gage's gut immediately tightened, and his instincts went on high alert. A quick glance at the clock above the stove showed it was nearly 4 a.m, hardly the time for a social call. Cursing under his breath, he picked up Maya and tucked her into his arm. He made sure Brennan was secured in his carrier before heading into the living room to see who would show up unannounced at this hour. Through the peephole, he saw a woman standing there beneath the overhead porch light. About his age, he'd guess, blonde hair, tall, pale. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place from where. Near her feet were 2 suitcases. Odd. She raised her hand to knock again, but he cracked open the door before she could, fearing the babies would start fussing again. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone abrupt. It was barely morning. No time for chit-chat. "Gage?" the woman said, her blue eyes locking with his. Now he knew where he recognized her from. He'd know that pale blue gaze anywhere. Her eyes were the same color as Christine's, the twins' dead mother. "Kylie, what are you doing here?" He stepped back slightly to let her in. He hadn't seen her since Tucker and Christine's wedding a 1.5 years ago. Yet she looked the same. Same wavy hair, same hippie clothes. The sleeve of her frou-frou tie-dyed shirt brushed his arm as she stepped inside. The scent of patchouli and soap teased his senses. He was just about to repeat his question when Brennan began wailing in the kitchen. "Crap! Here, hold this one!" He passed Maya to her aunt, ignoring the somewhat shocked look on Kylie's face as he took off for the kitchen. "And close the door, please." By the time he had Brennan out of his carrier and quieted down again, he found Kylie sitting on the sofa in the living room, cooing softly to Maya. Gage didn't miss the fact she'd brought those 2 suitcases inside the house, too. His stomach sank. Whatever had caused this woman to show up here in the middle of the night, it couldn't be good. And he had the distinct feeling it was about to be his problem. "So," Gage said, moving to stand in front of her while Brennan snoozed in his arms, "what are you doing here?" Kylie looked up at him. "I came to make sure my niece and nephew are okay, of course." She didn't miss the way he bristled at her words, nor the scowl darkening his face. "What?" she said. "They're my family too, more than yours." His gaze narrowed on her. "Really? You want to get into this now?" She kind of did. Kind of wanted the chance to unload some of her grief over the loss of her sister, not to mention the hurt over not being named guardian of the children. But she was tired, nearly as tired as Gage looked, if the dark circles beneath his eyes were any indication. And she had to remember that none of this was his fault, and unloading on him wouldn't make anything better. She took a deep breath, releasing the pent-up energy inside her and focusing on peace. Babies could easily pick up on emotions, and the last thing she wanted was to disturb the sweet baby sleeping in her arms. For a woman who'd never imagined having children of her own, it was a bittersweet surprise. Then there was the guilt too, of course. Always the guilt. "I don't want to get into anything with you, Gage." She forced a small smile. "And I apologize for showing up here at this hour. I've been basically living at the airport, trying to get a flight for days, but there was a baggage handler's strike that had everything in chaos. I had to scramble to get a ticket flying standby, and I wasn't able to get a direct. Then, when I got here, I went to my apartment in Burbank, but I can't stay there because it's sublet for 3 months, and I've reached my daily limit on my debit card, so no hotel and..." Kylie stopped for a breath. She was rambling again. Bad habit when she was stressed. She inhaled deeply again, counted to 3, then exhaled before continuing. Sorry. I really wanted to see the twins, and I didn't stop to consider or plan anything. I just raced here. I hope it's not too much of an inconvenience. Considering the fact he was still scowling at her, it appeared that's exactly what it was. Honestly, she shouldn't care. She had every right to be here. The twins were her family by blood, her last connection to the sister she'd loved more than life itself. The fact Christine had chosen to give custody of her children to a virtual stranger didn't change that. Kylie thought she understood, or at least she tried to. Her work kept her on the road too often. Kylie had always been the younger, more fragile sister. Her body was broken, and she wasn't fit to be a mother. Tears stung the backs of her eyes before she blinked them away. Maya squirmed on her shoulder, and she cuddled the baby closer, rubbing her back and kissing her head, while inhaling her good baby scent. Finally, the cloud of tension around Gage dissipated, and he moved to sit in the chair across from her, his broad shoulders slumping back against the cushions as he sighed. Up until that moment, she hadn't paid much attention to the fact he was shirtless, but with the lamp beside him casting a golden glow over his tanned skin, she'd have to be blind not to notice. Not that she was looking. She didn't think of Gage Winters that way. He was attractive, sure, handsome even, with that muscled, sculpted torso and mysterious dark looks. In fact, he reminded her a bit of that guy, the movie star from that breakout Asian rom-com the year before. Okay, fine. He was hot, but he was also very much off limits, and besides, Kylie wasn't looking for romance anyway. She had plenty on her plate right now as it was. I'm sorry too, Gage said, his voice quiet now. He rubbed his eyes with one hand while cradling a baby with the other. Was there anything sexier than a man with a baby? Nope. Kylie looked away fast. Not going there. It would churn up her emotions, and she couldn't let that happen. I didn't mean to jump down your throat. I'm just so tired. And you caught me at a bad moment. If you need a place to stay for the rest of the night, you can crash here. Thanks. She met his gaze, still spotting a hint of suspicion in his dark eyes. I'll make other arrangements in the morning. Promise. Maya stirred in her arms, and she smiled and whispered some soothing nonsense to the little girl, not missing the way Gage tracked her every move. How are you doing with the twins? Her heart still stung when she thought of them living without her, but she shoved it aside. She was back now, and she wasn't going anywhere for a while. Not until she made sure the custody arrangement her sister and brother-in-law had written in their will was really the best thing for Maya and Brennan. Yes, she planned to find another place to stay in the morning, but she wouldn't go far. They're good. Gage yawned, drawing her attention once more to his rippling muscles. Darn him. They keep me plenty busy. She wanted to ask him to put on a shirt, annoyed with herself for even caring. Instead, she shifted her focus to a different topic. What about the military? Aren't you worried about being deployed again? His relaxed posture tensed again. She'd apparently touched on a sore spot but didn't know where. I'm retired now, he said, his tone abrupt. Right, and not happy about it either, she thought, if his stony expression was any indication. Her inquisitive nature had her wanting to ask more about that. But she didn't know him that well yet, so she just nodded and cooed to Maya again. What about you? Gage asked, his fatigue evident in the roughness of his voice. Don't you have a decorating job or something? Feng shui consultant, not decorator, she corrected him, not missing the judgment behind his words. Honestly, after all this time, she should be used to it. People gave her crap every day when they discovered her occupation, but she didn't care. The energies and vibrations she worked with were as real and true as anything else in the universe, and she loved helping people better align themselves and their homes with the eternal forces of nature. And I did have a job. A big one, in fact, with a Japanese billionaire and his wife. They own 4 homes they were having me realign. But then I got the news about the accident. I guess the lawyer had trouble tracking me down because I didn't even hear from him until a week after it happened. Once I got the news, I did my best to get back to the States as soon as I could. That meant I had to break my contract with the billionaire and return the retainer money to them, then take 2 trains to the airport and wait on standby for a flight. All that, and I still missed the funeral. She bit her lip against the grief welling inside her. She gave a small shrug and cuddled Maya closer. I just needed to be here, to see them, you know? He nodded, his handsome face looking as sad as she felt. I know. I'm sorry for the loss of your sister. And I'm sorry for the loss of your friend. Her last word almost broke her, and she had to bite back a sob. She wouldn't cry in front of this man. She wouldn't. She wanted to project an air of calm professionalism in case she decided to fight him for custody. They sat there watching each other warily across the room until the weariness in her bones threatened to pull her under. Finally, she said, "Any chance I might get a cup of coffee?" Gage stared at her a moment, then sighed and stood, handing her the second baby as well. "Yep, be right back." She watched as he walked into the open kitchen and grabbed 2 cups from the cupboard, unable to keep from peeking at the way his soft gray sweatpants cupped his taut butt underneath. Good Lord. What was wrong with her? It had to be the exhaustion and jet lag. Had to be. If she could really be checking out Gage's butt under these circumstances, maybe she was just as ridiculous as everyone thought she was. And that meant she might never deserve to raise the twins. That thought was just too heartbreaking to bear. Chapter 2. Once they'd gotten both the twins settled in the nursery, Gage took a seat across the kitchen table from Kylie, the weight of awkwardness settling on his shoulders. At least he'd managed to grab a shirt from his bedroom to put on. Not that he wasn't comfortable walking around half naked. He'd been in the military his whole adult life. He didn't know what privacy meant anymore. It was just he'd caught Kylie staring at him a couple times. He'd liked it. A bit too much, to be honest. Crap. Must be the grief knocking him off kilter again. Yep, that had to be it. "So," he said finally when she remained quiet, staring down into her cup of coffee. "You mentioned coming back to see the twins. That's good. I mean, since you missed the funeral and all." She couldn't hide her slight wince at his words, and now Gage felt like even more of a jerk. Bad enough he'd been grouchy when he'd answered the door. And sure, he was beyond tired, but he still liked to conduct himself better. He took a deep breath and tried again. "How long are you planning on staying?" Kylie sipped her coffee and seemed to consider his question a moment. "I'm not sure yet." "What about your work?" Gage asked, sitting back in his chair. "The Tokyo client?" "That's over, like I said." She frowned down at the tabletop. "I'll be in California indefinitely." A tiny ball of tension in Gage's stomach tightened at that. It was a free country and all, and given her bohemian lifestyle, he'd imagined she wasn't one to stick to rules or schedules. But still. His mind flashed back to the shock he'd felt when he'd learned that Tucker and Christine were gone, and that he needed to take on custody of the twins, as per the deceased couple's wishes. At the time, he'd been too overwhelmed to consider how Kylie had fit into that equation, or more precisely, why she hadn't, even though she was the only blood relative the babies had left. Tucker had been an only child, and both sets of grandparents were no longer around. Tucker had told him all about it back when he and Christine found out they were expecting, the day they'd asked if he'd be the children's godfather. He'd said yes, never dreaming that anything would happen to his friends, but knowing all the same that if the twins needed him, he'd do anything for them. And that included keeping them out of the clutches of their aunt, who wandered the world rearranging people's furniture to create better vibrations, whatever that meant. He drank his coffee and watched her over the rim of his cup, letting his analytical mind do what it did best. His knack for details and numbers had served him well in his role as strategist for his SEAL team, and he hoped to put it to good use now that he was a civilian. He had to exercise those mental muscles. More than that, he had to control them. Not doing so had cost him relationships in the past. He had a habit of nitpicking, fighting, overthinking pretty much everything to the exclusion of his emotions. Heck, that's what had driven a wedge between him and his last girlfriend, with disastrous results. He'd been distracted, fighting with her for weeks about something stupid, exhausted mentally and physically. If only he'd kept sharp, kept on task, kept them from hitting that IED in time. Then maybe his mistake wouldn't have cost the lives of 2 of his teammates. Gage's chest squeezed with guilt and grief once more, and he gritted his teeth and inhaled deeply. This was getting him exactly nowhere. He didn't like surprises, and it was far too early in the morning and far too late to dredge up the past again. He set his mug on the table and glanced up at Kylie again. Despite her messy, wavy hair and crazy clothes, she was undeniably lovely. All creamy skin and pink, plump lips. Her exotic patchouli scent drifted past him again when she shifted in her seat, and Gage was forced to admit there was something about her he found attractive. Really attractive. Not that he planned to act on those feelings at all. Women were a distraction he couldn't afford. The last time he'd given in to that, it had cost him everything. Now he had the twins to consider too, and their welfare came above everything else. Still, he didn't want to be a complete dick and toss her out on the street either. So he came up with what he thought was a good compromise. "Well, if you need a place to crash for a couple of days, my sofa's available. I'd let you have the guest room, but the babies are in there now, so..." He congratulated himself for working a deadline into his invitation. A couple of days. She'd mentioned staying in the area indefinitely, but that was a no-go where he was concerned. Having her hanging around here, bonding with the twins, messing up what order he'd managed to establish in his life post-military, was not going to happen. Even if it might be nice having an extra set of hands around to help out with the babies. Images of her on the sofa with little Maya flashed into his head. She'd been good with her niece, a natural. Maya had quieted instantly in Kylie's arms, and Brennan had seemed equally enraptured when she'd helped put him to bed right before joining Gage in the kitchen. So he'd enjoy her help for a couple of days, then send her on her way. With that in mind, he stood and dumped what was left of his coffee down the drain. The last thing he needed was more caffeine. He should be napping himself while the kids were asleep to make up for the sleep he hadn't gotten for most of the night. "I'll, just grab some bedding from the closet so you can get set up on the sofa." "Thanks," she said, her forlorn tone following him down the hallway and causing a buzz of awareness in his blood. Which was bad. So bad. As Gage sifted through the linens in the closet, he couldn't help thinking he was suddenly in more danger here in his own home than he'd ever been in the worst sniper fire. "Thanks," Kylie said again a few minutes later when Gage returned with her bedding. At least he'd covered himself now, thank goodness. She was up for some male eye candy as much as the next woman, but she felt way too vulnerable at the moment, and Gage seemed way too strong and tempting for her comfort. She took the stack of sheets and blankets from him and walked into the living room, as much to put distance between them as to get herself set for some rest. He followed her, of course, so she concentrated on tucking the sheets beneath the couch cushions and not the way his shirt outlined the sculpted muscles of his chest or how his scent, soap and sandalwood, seemed to wrap around her like a fuzzy layer of security. Which was insane. She'd just met the guy. Well, okay. She'd met him before at her sister's wedding, but that didn't really count. They'd shared one dance and a toast, and that was it. Besides, she'd been dating someone else at the time and hadn't been interested in anything more with the handsome best man. Not that she was now either. She was here to size Gage up as a parent and figure out why Christine had left him the twins without even telling her. That was it. You already know the answer to the second one. She punched the pillow he'd given her with far more force than was necessary before throwing it onto the end of the sofa. Ever since she'd been diagnosed with endometriosis at 19, her sister had treated her with kid gloves. And yes, Kylie had grown up always talking about how she wanted to have a big family of her own one day. She loved kids. The fact she couldn't have any of her own now was hard to deal with, of course, but it wasn't a reason to exclude her from anything related to babies. Was it? A familiar lump of sadness clogged her throat before she swallowed it down hard. Her last serious boyfriend had certainly thought it disqualified her as long-term relationship material. If she closed her eyes, she could still hear Jeff's words from the day he broke up with her. At first, when she'd told him she couldn't have children, he'd tried to act like it didn't matter, like having kids of his own someday wasn't a big deal. But that state of affairs hadn't lasted long. Eventually, Jeff had sat her down and told her that he just couldn't tie himself to someone who would never get pregnant, and that was that. He wasn't willing to consider adoption, or fostering, or seeking out a surrogate. She couldn't have kids, so he was done with her. The end. She'd taken it hard, and her sister had been the one she poured her heart out to, confiding in her how hard it was to see other people out and about with babies, knowing that could never be her. Was that why Chris had thought she couldn't handle being a good mother to the twins? No. She shook her head and turned to find Gage still watching her with that too perceptive dark gaze of his. Ugh, why did it seem like he could look into her very soul with those bottomless eyes of his? Then again, it could just be the jet lag making her act like a fool. Feeling far more defensive than she liked, Kylie crossed her arms and frowned at him. "What time do you get the twins up in the morning?" "Whenever they wake up, I suppose," he said, blinking at her. "Well, that's not good. Babies need routine. You have to get them on a schedule. Everyone knows that." She ignored his arched brow at her snippy tone. "I've done a lot of research on child rearing, and all the books say that." "I don't care what the books say. I've read plenty of them myself, and they haven't been real helpful so far," he said. "I'm in the trenches here, day in, day out. I know what's best for Maya and Brennan." "Do you?" She took a step closer to him, refusing to be intimidated. "Because last time I checked, you're a single guy, with no clue what he's doing around kids." "Excuse me." He moved closer as well, the soft cotton of his t-shirt shifting over his muscled torso. "How dare you walk in here and presume to tell me how to raise my children? Your children. I'm their aunt. I'm a blood relation. I should be involved in their lives and in how they're raised. Like you were so involved before your sister died, huh? Remind me again where you were the day of the funeral." He narrowed his gaze on her, a small muscle ticking near his tense jaw, his expression skeptical. "You want the twins, don't you? That's why you flew halfway around the world in the middle of the night to show up on my doorstep. I was hoping you just wanted to see them, like a good aunt." "I do want to see them and make sure they're safe. And I need to understand why my sister chose you over me." She hadn't meant to say that last part out loud. The heartache about Christine and Tucker's deaths and their decision to trust a stranger with their babies was just too much. Okay, so Gage wasn't a stranger to them, but he was to her. And being this close to Gage wasn't helping. It was like her brain went haywire around him. She tried to squeeze back her spiraling emotions and focus. "So, yes, I'm here to check you out. Make sure you're a fit parent." Her gaze flickered from his eyes to his chest before returning. "You've got baby food on your shirt." He continued staring at her a moment, his warm breath fanning the hair around her face. He was close enough for her to reach out and touch him if she wanted. Her fingertips itched to do just that, so she clenched her fists at her sides instead. Seriously, whatever this thing was sizzling between them, she needed to get over it fast. She didn't do relationships anymore. Break her heart once, shame on him. Break her heart twice, shame on her. Or something like that. Whatever, she didn't need to get involved with anyone else right now except the twins. Especially not Gage. She didn't back down. He didn't either. It was like those old Western movie standoffs, without the guns. Finally, Gage cursed under his breath and moved back away from her to peer down at the front of himself, picking at the splotch near his shoulder. Grumbling, he turned to head back down the hall, casting her a glance over his shoulder. "I need to take a shower." "Don't worry," she called after him, unable to resist getting in one last barb. "The twins will be fine with me. Take your time. Take off with my kids, and I'll have the state troopers on you fast. You won't know what hit you." He shot back before giving her a fake smile and shutting the bathroom door behind him. She wanted to yell back at him but didn't want to wake the twins. Instead, she stood there stewing in her rage as a multitude of great comebacks surfaced in her mind. Typical. Always thinking of the best zinger after the fact. Alone again, all her bravado vanished. leaving her aching and cold and so filled with sorrow over losing her sister that Kylie nearly collapsed to her knees. Instead, she sank down onto the couch and stared at the black screen of the TV without seeing it. The sound of running water echoed down the hall, and she finally summoned the energy to get up and wander down to the nursery. Without making a noise, she snuck inside and walked over to peer down at the sleeping babies. Tears fell as she stroked their heads and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Chris. I'm so sorry. I wasn't there for you when they were born. I'm so sorry you're gone, and I never got to say goodbye. I'm so sorry." She lost track of time as she watched Maya and Brennan sleep. Eventually, she pulled her eyes from them and looked around to find the room neat, if a bit bland. All the essentials were there. Changing table, supplies, a few toys, clothes. For a guy who had no track record with babies, he was clearly trying his best, taking the responsibility seriously. She felt a tiny bit of remorse for being so harsh earlier with Gage, but he'd hit too close to home with his remark about her wanting the twins for herself. Deep down inside, maybe she did. She'd come here to check on her niece and nephew and see if they really could be a permanent part of her life. The sound of the water shutting off in the bathroom had her swiping the backs of her hands over her cheeks and stepping back from the cribs. The last thing she wanted was to let him see her crying and weak. She knew people like Gage, traditional, buttoned up, anal, thought of her as some kind of new age freak. And maybe she was. But she was also strong and smart and funny and caring. Gage would fight her for custody. That much was clear now. And she'd fight right back. Kylie had missed her sister's funeral. No way she'd walk away from the twins. Not now, maybe not ever. Chapter 3. Later, after a few hours of sleep and a few cups of coffee, Gage was feeling a tad more human. He checked in on the twins in the nursery, then did his best to clean up the living room while not waking a still sleeping Kylie. She looked so peaceful lying there, snoring softly, her hair covering half her face, that Gage couldn't help but smile. Truth was, he felt like a jerk for the way he'd blown up the night before. He owed her an apology for that. Letting her sleep in was partially an attempt to make amends. But part of him also didn't want to wake her up just yet because he liked having his own space. He'd always been like that, even in the SEALs. The other guys on his team used to give him crap about it, calling him a finicky old lady who had to have things just so. It wasn't entirely wrong, the having things just so part anyway. It gave him a sense of control when everything else in his life was a mess. He'd never known his father, a sailor who had died when Gage was just a baby. Then losing his mom when he was only 4 to cancer had rocked his universe, and not in a good way. As a kid, he'd coped as best he could, living with his uncle Derek. The guy was responsible enough, but hardly what Gage would have called affectionate. It had also been rough to deal with the way he constantly filled Gage's head with stories about how Gage's father had been responsible for his mother's death because he'd broken her heart, taking away her will to fight her illness. Since then, Gage had internalized all of that crap, puzzling it over and over in his head, and still never making peace with it. He picked up a basket of clean baby clothes from the laundry room and sat down in the kitchen to fold them. Honestly, he'd never really bought into Uncle Derek's story about everything being his father's fault, mainly because he still remembered the stories from his mother about his dad being a hero. In fact, the reason Gage had decided to join the Navy was to follow in his father's footsteps. It made him a little uneasy to think about how much Uncle Derek would have hated that decision. But he died at the end of Gage's first year of college, so that was the end of that. And of any family he had. Until now. Now, he had 2 children to love and look out for. It was daunting, maybe even terrifying, but he was committed to being there for them. He'd just learn as he went and hope not to make too many mistakes in raising them. No, not hope. Hope wasn't strong enough. Hope didn't fix the mistakes of the past. Neither did sorrow or regret. He was committed to doing right by the twins, no matter what. He already had too many screw-ups in his rearview mirror. He wouldn't be adding the twins to that tally. Gage sighed and shoved the past away. He had plenty to focus on in the present, and the future was just plain crowded. One step at a time, he reminded himself as he methodically stacked folded baby outfits on the table. Pink ones for Maya and blue for Brennan. Gage had reached the bottom of the basket when he heard a squeak from down the hall. The twins were up. A smile rose to his lips unbidden. Before he could get on his feet, though, Kylie sat up on the sofa, looking far too adorable for her own good. Her hair stuck up all over, and one side of her face was red and covered with crease marks from where she'd slept with it mashed into her pillow. "What the?" she said, her sleep-roughened tone sending a blast of heat through him straight to his toes. She blinked and squinted around the room, then over at him in the kitchen. "What are you doing? Well, I guess it's morning, but it must still be early." Gage stood and set the laundry basket aside, giving her a bland smile. He was used to getting up at the crack of dawn from his time in the military. Habits like that didn't just go away simply because he'd retired. "Morning, sunshine." He meant for his tone to be sarcastic, but it came out more pleasant than he expected, surprising even him. What was up with that? To distract himself from pursuing that thought, he walked into the living room and over to the toy basket in one corner. Having something to amuse one twin while he got the other ready for the day had proven to be useful. Between the items that had been sent over from Christine and Tucker's after the funeral and the new stuff he'd bought for the twins himself, they had enough toys to entertain a small country. Still, when he stared at the assorted stuffed animals, fabric books, and stackable cups, he felt more than a bit overwhelmed. He'd never been good at connecting with people, and the twins left him constantly at a loss despite his dedication to them. "Try the pink giraffe," Kylie said from behind him. "I used it with Maya last night, and she seemed to like it." "Okay." He grabbed the small stuffed toy, then hazarded a glance back at Kylie on the sofa. She'd managed to get herself situated now, though the neck of that floaty top of hers was hanging down on one side to reveal a creamy shoulder. Out of nowhere, images of her in his arms and him running his tongue down said shoulder popped into his mind. Oh boy. Nope, nope, nope. After taking a deep breath, he headed for the nursery where the twins were now wailing up a storm. "Thanks, I owe you one." "Yes," she said from behind him, stopping him in his tracks and making him turn around to face her. Her smile seemed to brighten the already sunlit room, and it was at that moment that Gage knew he was in a world of trouble. "You do." After walking into the nursery and picking up Brennan, he held the giraffe out to Maya and was surprised to see she quieted immediately after grabbing hold of the toy. Maybe Kylie was better at this than he'd imagined. On the other hand, it could have been luck. "Need any help?" Kylie asked from the doorway. Her clothes were rumpled, her hair messy, and she looked like she wanted to go back to sleep. So why did his thoughts about them together clog his head again? "No, I got this," he said, not daring to glance at her again for fear he'd do something stupid like walk over there and kiss her silly. He needed to snap out of this. He had things to do today and babies to watch. He didn't have time to lust over a woman who'd flat out told him she was here to check up on him and possibly fight him for custody of the twins. He needed to get her packed and out of here as soon as possible. Gage inhaled deeply before saying, "Go ahead and get ready for the day. We're fine." Sssss. His words had stung. "We're fine," clearly excluding her. But Kylie did feel minimally better after a shower that helped to rinse away some of the jet lag. Fresh clothing improved her outlook too. Dressed in comfy jeans and a keep calm and feng shui on sweatshirt, she headed back out into the living room to clean up her bedding from the night before. Honestly, she'd love to rearrange his furniture to better harmonize the energy in Gage's home. Everyone would be happier and more peaceful with a sofa against the wall and a good scrub down of the windows. But she wasn't going to push her luck by suggesting that to Gage. Not yet, anyway. Gage was in the kitchen getting bottles ready for the twins. While she'd been getting ready, he'd managed to get both babies dressed. Color her impressed. Maybe he wasn't so bad with kids after all. But that didn't change the fact she planned to be more involved in the twins' lives going forward. As she folded and stacked her sheets, Kylie couldn't help noticing that Gage was humming as he worked. The tune was sweet and sad and tugged at her heart, regardless of whether she wanted it to or not. Determined to make the most of an awkward situation, she finished cleaning up the sofa, then joined him at the table. "What's that song you're humming?" "Huh?" He gave her a slightly confused stare, as if he hadn't realized what he'd been doing. "Oh, sorry. I do that sometimes. When I'm concentrating. That's what the guys in my squad used to tell me anyway. Helpful for dealing with babies, not so much when you're on a black ops mission with people trying to kill you." Yikes, I'd say not. While he picked up Maya and stuck a bottle in her mouth, Kylie did the same with Brennan, settling into the chair across from Gage's. That must have been pretty terrifying. He shrugged, drawing her attention once more to his broad shoulders beneath the soft cotton of his black t-shirt. "We're trained for it. You learn to channel that adrenaline and fight-or-flight energy into more productive activities, like tracking and reconnaissance. It's all about redirection." "I get that. My work is about redirection too," she said, surprising herself. Normally, she didn't discuss her occupation with people she didn't know well. Years of judgmental idiots had taught her that. Despite the growing respect for feng shui and her wealthy client list, most people refused to take her work seriously. When he didn't say anything, she looked up to find him staring down at Maya with such awe that it took her breath away. Her chest squeezed, and she focused on Brennan once more. Truthfully, she understood that too. There was something about having a baby in your arms that made the rest of the world and all its problems fall away. "They are so precious." "Yeah, they are," Gage said, his deep voice quiet. "Listen, Kylie, I owe you an apology for last night. I shouldn't have stalked off the way I did." A bit shocked, she met his gaze. "Wow, thanks for that, and thanks for letting me crash here." He watched her a moment before looking away. "I'm sorry about what I said about you and your sister in the funeral. I had no right." Those words caused a tiny pinch inside her. She'd been determined last night to not like him, and now he had to go and be all nice this morning. She exhaled slowly and smiled at Brennan when he caught her finger in his little fist. "I'm sorry about questioning your parenting abilities. Obviously, you've learned some skills if you got both of them ready by yourself today." Gage snorted. "You learn fast with 2 screaming babies in your care. You should have seen me the first night. All 3 of us were a mess. Formula and food everywhere. And let's not even talk about the diaper situation. So much poop. Talk about a black ops mission." Kylie chuckled and set Brennan's now empty bottle on the table. Her nephew was smiling at her. He seemed to be a happy baby despite losing his parents. Kylie imagined that it had to have an impact on him and his sister, but at that moment he seemed perfectly normal, especially when he made a grab for her hair. She swept it out of the way just in time, so Brennan fisted her sweatshirt instead. She glanced over to find Gage rocking slowly from side to side, cooing to the baby girl. Her expression was more serious than her brother's, but it was clear that she was content in Gage's arms. What girl wouldn't be happy nestled against his chest and getting all his attention? "You know, the last time I saw Chris and the twins was right after they were born," she said. "We talked about coming up with signals we could use to communicate with each other so we wouldn't make any noise when they were sleeping." "Like sign language?" Gage asked. "That sounds like a good idea." "Yeah," she smiled. "Nothing fancy, though. Just like okay and hello and help." She showed him the signals they'd come up with. Chris was so creative that way. Her voice cracked as her throat constricted with unexpected tears. That was the thing about grief. It hit you out of nowhere at the worst times. She squeezed her eyes shut and held little Brennan tighter, cuddling him beneath her chin, wishing she could see her sister one last time. "Hey," Gage said, his soft tone soothing Kylie more than she ever could have imagined. "I miss them too. Every day I wish I could just talk to Tucker one more time, hang out in their kitchen and eat some of Christine's fabulous snickerdoodles." Man, those were the best, weren't they? She took a deep breath, feeling some of the overwhelming sadness lift slightly at the happy memories. "I can't cook at all. Well, except for breakfast." "Good to know." Gage smiled over at her, and once again she was struck by just how gorgeous he was, all tanned and toned and brimming with masculine grace. Before she could get too carried away with that, though, he brought her back to the topic at hand. "I hope you're not too hard on yourself about missing your sister's funeral. It was an accident. No one was prepared. I'm sure Christine would want you to remember all the good times, the wonderful memories, instead of beating yourself up because of one day." His words helped lighten her gloomy mood a bit, yet an empty void remained. Her sadness had been what had kept her going since Christine's death, what had driven her to quit the amazing job in Tokyo and rush home as fast as she could to be with the twins. The problems came when she didn't have something to do. That was when grief dragged on her, overwhelming her. Brennan squirmed against her chest, and she pushed to her feet. She needed to be moving. She paced with Brennan around the house, her eyes stinging and her heart pounding. The last week had been a whirlwind, and she needed some time and space to clear her head and get her priorities in order. Yes, she was the twins' aunt, and she wanted what was best for them, but she still wasn't sure if that was her or not. Lord knew she'd never raised kids herself. She'd never even spent much time around them, finding it too upsetting since she'd learned she couldn't have any of her own. She was just returning to the living room when she narrowly avoided a collision with Gage. "You hungry?" he asked. "We can put them on a blanket to play in the living room. They'll be happy there for a while." As soon as he mentioned food, her stomach growled. "I could eat." "Good." Gage gestured for her to follow him back to the living room. Balancing Maya against his hip, he spread a brightly colored blanket on the floor. He put Maya down and gestured for Kylie to do the same with Brennan. Gage went to the toy basket and grabbed an assortment of items. "That ought to do it." "Are they crawling yet?" She was a little embarrassed that she had to ask. She should know that about her own niece and nephew. "Some. I've been working on child-proofing. If they're together, they're usually content to stay put. I just don't wander off too far." "It's a whole different world, isn't it?" Kylie commented as she struggled to come up to speed with the baby's development. It left her reeling emotionally. "So far," he said, looking down at the kids. They were both sitting up, exchanging brightly colored cups and rings between them and babbling in some language that they seemed to understand. "While they're happy, let's put those breakfast skills of yours to the test. I'm starved." She was too, but she was still feeling overwhelmed. Taking in a breath, she committed to staying focused on one day at a time. That was how she'd take things now, until she figured out what she was going to do here. One day at a time. She could do that, couldn't she? Yep. She could, and she would. She smoothed a hand down her sweatshirt and looked around the room. It pretty much screamed single guy. The furniture was good quality, though, and the space could be soothing if properly arranged. She should keep the idea that was forming to herself, but what the heck? "I'll cook if you let me rearrange your living room." "What?" He turned to her with a frown. "What's wrong with my living room?" "Nothing, except the energy flow is all off." Kylie forced a small smile and followed him into the kitchen. She glanced back, able to see the kids, and couldn't help noticing the obvious flaws with the room. Looking back his way, she saw that he was pulling eggs and bacon and mushrooms and peppers from the fridge. "Your sofa should be against the wall and the chair placed in the corner, and don't even get me started on your windows." "Huh?" "You'll see," she said, then turned her attention to cooking. As she prepared the omelets, they talked and worked, falling into a rhythm. They both kept an eye on the babies. Would she fight him for custody? Was she prepared to raise the twins on her own? Those were questions she didn't know the answers to, so she'd wait and see where all this took her. Chapter 4. 2 days later, Gage was freaking out. He'd figured it would not be a big deal having Kylie around. After all, she'd be gone soon, right? But the more time she spent at his place, the more things changed. Gage wasn't a big proponent of change. He liked things to be the same, all the time. It had started when she insisted on moving his sofa. Then it had quickly escalated to changes in the kitchen and the bedrooms. Even the bathroom hadn't escaped her little touches. She'd moved the towels and placed candles everywhere. The kitchen, though, that was the last straw. He'd just returned from a grocery store run and found her teetering atop one of the chairs, moving some of the houseplants from his living room to the top of his cabinets. Gage hovered between the urge to ignore her and just put the groceries away and the urge to yank Kylie off that chair before she killed herself. But yanking her down would mean touching her, and he wasn't about to do that. It would be a huge mistake. Bad enough he couldn't seem to stop thinking about her. Putting his hands on her would only make things worse. So, instead, he sidled around where she was working and shoved a milk jug into the fridge. With one eye on her, he stacked canned goods neatly on the shelf in the pantry, with all the labels facing outward, perfectly aligned. He gave a satisfied nod. Exerting control over things as mundane as soup, spaghetti sauce, vegetables gave him the illusion of being in charge. His security that he was in command of his environment had been severely lessened when he took on the twins and learned just how unpredictable babies were. Having Kylie as a house guest had further eroded it. "There," Kylie said with a smile as she climbed down. She gestured to her handiwork. "What do you think?" "I think it was fine the way it was," he grumbled, and quickly turned back to the groceries. "It wasn't fine," she insisted. "Did you know having empty space between the top of your cabinets and the ceiling is a bad thing? Chi gets stuck there, clogging up your energy flow and creating bad vibes. Having living, breathing plants up there helps keep things moving." "Yeah? And who's going to water them?" He shook his head and shut the pantry door, looking at her now. Big mistake. Her cheeks were flushed, and her blue eyes sparkled with joy. He suddenly felt a nearly overwhelming urge to pull her into his arms. Instead, he shoved his hands into the back pockets of his jeans and stepped away from temptation. "Guess it'll have to be me when you're gone." He didn't mean to be rude, but he wanted his space back. More to the point, he needed her out of his realm. One of twins squeaked in their carrier seats on the table. Gage's gaze went to them. It was a happy sound, he quickly realized. No need to react. He was getting better at knowing when to do that. He had a long way to go in the fatherhood department, but he was gaining confidence, slowly. "So, what's the matter?" Kylie asked, tilting her head and thrusting out that full pink bottom lip of hers in a little pout. "You can't be scared of heights." "No, I just don't appreciate having my place rearranged without my permission." He moved around her and back over to the bags of groceries. "How were the twins while I was gone?" "Fine." She sat at the table and toyed with Brennan's sock-covered toes, making the boy giggle and rock back and forth. "I realize that you don't believe in feng shui, but even you have to admit the twins have been much more relaxed since I got here." He put away the peanut butter and cheese crackers and boxes of cereal, then stuffed the reusable grocery bags away under the sink. She might be right, not that he was ready to admit it. Maybe. Or maybe they're just getting used to being with me now. They're too young to express their feelings in words, but they have to realize that their environment has changed. I guess you could say that it's been an adjustment for all of us. "That could be true," Kylie said. "I still feel that the energy here is much more positive now than it was the first night I arrived, though. Part of that has to be because of the changes I've made. As for adjusting, you're still working out your routine with them and changing things all the time. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's unsettling to you and them." Gage wanted to argue, but things really did look better the way she had them. He wanted to argue that she still shouldn't have changed so much. Some of it, like the plants. She'd moved without even asking him first. But he was honestly too weary to put up a fight. Having her here had meant he'd gotten more sleep and had time to run errands without having to worry about carting 2 babies around with him, but still. "It'll all work out," he said, because it had to. The kids were his to raise, and that wasn't changing. They were his last remaining connection to his friend. A buddy he'd always miss. Gage took his job of guardian seriously. It was one heck of a responsibility. He was proud that his friend had trusted him so much, even if he was struggling at times with grief and feeling overwhelmed. But what mattered was that he was getting through it. He and the twins got into a better rhythm with each other every day. They were making it work as their own little family of 3. And he wasn't at all sure that having Kylie around would help in the long run. "I'm sorry I didn't ask you before moving the plants," she said, her voice soft. "I just wanted to help. And just so you know, I also washed the windows while you were gone. They let more light in now, which is good for everyone. Light equates to happiness. So more good vibes. Exactly. We all need them." Kylie gave him a wobbly smile, and he had to remind himself that she'd lost her sister. Her grief might be even greater than his. He wasn't convinced that gave her the right to take over his house or try to take over his custody arrangement. But he tried to tamp down his irritation with her. Maya grunted. When he looked over, he saw her little face was all red and scrunched up, a sure sign she was doing her business. Again. Duty called, and with a sigh, Gage walked to her and unstrapped her from her carrier. He picked her up and carried her down the hall to the changing table in the nursery. He'd just gotten her outfit off and was grabbing a clean diaper from the box to have on standby when Kylie walked in with Brennan and began doing the same thing with him. As he stripped off Maya's dirty diaper and disposed of it in the genie thing, he caught Kylie watching him, her expression unreadable. What was that about? Annoyed, he ripped a wet wipe out of the container with more force than was necessary. After getting Maya's bottom clean, he grabbed the tube of diaper rash ointment and squirted some out on his fingers. Kylie was staring at him again, and this time, he'd had enough. "Why are you watching me?" he snapped. "I've changed a couple hundred diapers in the past few weeks. I know what I'm doing." "That's a lot of cream, isn't it?" She pointed at the huge dollop on his fingers. Gage scowled. She was right. It was enough for 5 bottoms Maya's size, but he wasn't about to tell Kylie that. Instead, he smeared it on the baby, then wiped his hand on a towel before strapping on the clean diaper and snapping Maya's outfit back on. He lifted Maya in his arms and started back out of the nursery. He should let it go. He absolutely should, but he felt the need to make something clear. Before reaching the door, he turned to Kylie. "Back off with your opinions, okay?" he said. "You're here as a guest. You're the twins' aunt, and I promise not to forget that. But you aren't their mother or guardian. You never will be. Think about that next time you decide to comment on what I do. Got it?" He didn't miss the way her face paled at his words, and he regretted them immediately. She had gotten under his skin with her qi and feng shui stuff, and he didn't know how to get her out. What was worse was that when he saw her with Brennan cuddled to her chest like he was then, Gage wasn't sure he wanted to. That scared him most of all. Kylie stayed in the nursery with Brennan, fighting back the sting of tears. Gage's words had struck far too close to home, but it had been a lucky shot, that was all. He didn't know about her endometriosis or her inability to have kids of her own. He'd been lashing out from frustration. Most likely he didn't even mean what he said, but that didn't stop his words from hurting her. With Brennan on her hip, she straightened up the nursery, fiddling with things that were already neat and tidy. When she felt the threat of tears recede, she carried Brennan back to the living room where she found Gage sitting on the sofa, flipping through channels on the TV with one hand, while steadying Maya as he bounced her on his leg with the other. Kylie walked over to the chair in the corner and sat. She reached for a soft, stuffed truck with a silly face that was a favorite of Brennan's. As she drove the truck along the arm of the chair, Kylie could feel Gage's gaze on her, but she didn't look up, not wanting to get into it with him again now. He wasn't the only one who was frustrated. In truth, she hadn't slept well the night before, dreaming of her sister and the last time they'd seen each other. In the dream, she'd kept trying to reach Christine, but each time she got close, her sister moved farther away. It turned into one of those nightmares where you just kept running and running but never reached your goal. To say it mirrored her own life was an understatement. After what felt like forever, Gage clicked off the TV and tossed the remote aside, sighing. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have snapped at you just now." Her usual, "it's fine," teetered on the tip of her tongue before she swallowed it down, nodding in acknowledgement instead. Him biting her head off every time she made a suggestion wasn't okay, But maybe she had gone overboard, looking for reasons to criticize him. Either way, she didn't want to fight with him again. Maybe putting a bit of space between them would help calm them all down. It was a beautiful, warm, sunny day outside, and she suddenly couldn't stand not to be out in it. Kylie pushed to her feet and carried Brennan to the kitchen to set him in his carrier. "I think I'll take the kids for a walk," she said. "I worked a job in this neighborhood a few years ago and remember a nice park about half a block from here that I liked visiting. Even posted about it on my social media. Where's the stroller?" Gage watched her for a second before pointing to the closet by the front door. "Thanks." She walked over and got the stroller out, setting it up before taking Maya from him. "Do you want to come?" she asked, more out of politeness than any actual desire for him to go along. She really did need a few minutes without him. "No, you go. I've got some stuff here I need to get done, but thanks." He still seemed uncomfortable, and she couldn't tell if that was with her or at his own behavior. It did compel her to ask another question. "Are you okay with me taking them outside?" He hesitated a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, it's fine. They like going for walks." Kylie got the two babies strapped into the double stroller before heading out the front door. "We'll be back shortly. You've got your phone, just in case?" Gage called once they were on the porch. "Yep." She patted her pocket where her phone was stored, then put her wallet in the diaper bag, and then slung it over the handle of the stroller. She shut the door behind her before easing down the steps to the sidewalk. A warm breeze blew, and as she walked slowly toward the park, her cares and burdens began to lift. Nature always did that for her. Perhaps that's why she loved using plants so much in her decorating. She needed that connection to nature both indoors and out. Birds tweeted, and the sky was blue, and all seemed right with the world for a change. She couldn't help gazing upward, wondering if Christine was looking down on her. A bittersweet pang tugged at her heart, though, as she wondered if her sister would be happy to see her with the babies. Or not. Gage hadn't been entirely wrong in what he'd said. She wasn't currently the twins' parent or guardian. There was a chance she never would be. If Gage maintained custody, he could make it very difficult for her to have a relationship with the babies at all, and the last thing she wanted was to mess that all up. She'd heard his promise to remember that she was their aunt. That helped. A little. She exhaled slowly and crossed the street to the park. It was a nice little place, with lots of trees, a jungle gym, a swing set, and plenty of benches. It was early afternoon, so there were plenty of mothers with young kids and babies milling about. Still, she was able to find a quiet spot where she was away from too much commotion, giving her a chance to use the peace and solitude to center herself. There was a man across the way reading a paper, but otherwise she had this little corner of the park to herself. She sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree with a stroller in front of her so she could watch the babies. They'd fallen asleep on the short walk here and looked so adorable that she couldn't resist pulling out her phone to snap a couple of photos. She stood and turned this way and that to get the right angle without all the shadows, then walked back a few paces to get a more scenic shot. With autumn approaching, the leaves were just starting to turn, and the colors were magnificent. She took more pictures, thinking they'd be nice to share with her fans on social media, and also to record the hues for future inspiration on her jobs. She liked using natural tones whenever possible. She usually took a bunch of pictures when working on her jobs to make sure she kept the proper chai flowing throughout all of her clients' spaces. In fact, she'd nearly maxed out her phone's memory on her last job in Tokyo. The warning popped up on her screen before she swiped it away. She'd have to remember to go through all her footage from that job later and delete it since she wouldn't need it now. From the corner of her eye, she saw the man from across the way get up and tuck his paper under his arm as he walked toward them. Kylie looked up as he passed, murmuring a polite greeting. He was dressed all in black, which seemed odd on such a nice day, and his hat and sunglasses kept her from seeing his face. She just tucked her phone back in her pocket and was moving to take a seat on the bench again when the man suddenly snatched the diaper bag off the handle of the stroller and ran off. Too shocked at first to react, it took Kylie a moment to move. Then she took off after him. Chasing someone down with a stroller wasn't the easiest or safest thing to do, but she couldn't just let the man run off with her things. Bumping along the sidewalk woke the twins up, and soon they started crying. Kylie felt like crying herself. Her wallet was in there and the kids' things. Plus, she'd bought that diaper bag for Christine as a shower present. She felt weirdly attached to it. "Hey, stop!" she yelled, but the guy was so far ahead of them now, it was pointless. She slowed to a stop. "Everything okay?" a guy jogging by asked, his expression sympathetic. "No. That man just stole my diaper bag and took off with my wallet." Her heart was pounding after giving chase, and the babies were howling. Kylie felt like the worst caretaker on earth. She'd risked not only her own life by going after a criminal, but the twins' lives too. Stress still sizzled through her veins, and tears stung her eyes once more as she touched each of the babies' faces, trying to soothe them. I can't seem to do anything right today." "I'm sorry," the jogger said. "Can I call the police for you? Walk you home?" "Thank you, but no." She shook her head. At least her phone hadn't been stolen too. "I'll call myself, after I get the twins settled down." "If you're sure," the guy said, smiling down at the babies. "My wife and I just had a kid a year ago. I know what it's like. It'll get better, I promise." "Thanks." She waved as the guy took off again, then bent to comfort each crying child. Finally, once the babies were settled again, she turned to head back to Gage's house. It was only then that she realized how badly she was trembling. Her skin felt too tight for her body, and every car door slamming or twig snapping sent her blood pressure into overdrive. This was a nice neighborhood. People shouldn't get mugged here, and yet it seemed that was exactly what had happened to her. Kylie scanned her surroundings as she neared the house, ready to break into a sprint again at the first sign of her assailant's return. Luckily, there was no sign of him, and she made it back up onto the porch. Then she caught sight of herself in the glass of the door and lost it. She looked like a wild woman, hair going everywhere from the breeze and from running after the mugger. Her clothes were askew, and her heart felt ready to beat out of her chest. The stress of the attack and the fight with Gage from earlier mixed with her lingering grief and boiled over into useless tears. Angry with herself, she brushed the back of her hand over her cheeks just as the front door opened. Gage took one look at her, his expression instantly shifting to look concerned as he ushered them all inside. "Are you okay? Is something wrong with the kids?" He ran his hands over their little arms and legs before turning to her. "Tell me what happened." He was calm, focused, and somehow that made her completely lose it. Voice shaking, she said, "Well, we went to the pea park and it was nice, and then there was a man there and he took the... and I tried to catch him, but..." She never finished because the next thing Kylie knew, she was wrapped in Gage's strong arms, her face pressed into his hard, warm chest, and all coherent thoughts left because he just felt so good, so safe. Chapter 5. "It's okay. You're home now. You're safe," Gage promised. With her ear pressed to his chest, she could feel the rumble of the words inside him. She wanted to stay right there more than anything. Kylie took a deep breath and moved back a step, her knees still wobbling. She nodded and swallowed hard against the sandpaper in her throat. Now that she was safely home and the adrenaline had started to wear off, she felt like she could collapse at any moment. Luckily, Gage's strong hands were holding onto her arms, keeping her upright. She managed to speak more coherently this time. "There was a man at the park. He stole the diaper bag. My wallet was in it." Gage let her go and ran his hands through his hair. "You're all right. He didn't hurt you, did he?" he repeated. Sagging back against the wall for support, Kylie gave a weak shrug. "No, he didn't touch me. I'm just rattled. I tried to go after him, but with the stroller it was hard." Gage froze and gave her a stony stare. "You tried to go after him? Why would you go after the guy who mugged you, especially with the twins in your care?" He cursed again and turned away, muttering under his breath. Of all the absurd, irresponsible, dangerous things to do, A mixture of anger and guilt bubbled up inside Kylie, causing the backs of her eyes to sting with unshed tears. He was right. What had she been thinking? Going after a stranger who might well have been armed and taking the twins right along with her. What had she been thinking? Gage was right to yell at her. She had no business even thinking about being a mother. Not when she did such a bad job of keeping the twins safe. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she felt lower than she ever had before, wondering if this was what Chris had seen in her. If this was the reason her sister hadn't wanted her to be guardian of the twins. Then, just when she thought she might collapse completely in a puddle on the floor, a warm hand squeezed her shoulder. "Hey." Gage's voice was soft as he crouched beside her. "Hey, don't cry. I'm sorry for what I said, Kylie. This wasn't your fault. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I was just so worried when I heard what happened that I overreacted." He sighed and tipped her chin up with one finger. "Please forgive me." His sincerity only made her cry all the more. Gage straightened and pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest, rocking her slowly and murmuring against the top of her head, until finally, her tears ran out. At last, she took a deep breath, feeling drained but marginally better due to his unexpected kindness. Kylie finally pushed away from him, her eyes puffy and her cheeks stinging with heat. Whether from her crying or from her nearness to him, she wasn't sure. She couldn't seem to meet his gaze now, embarrassed by sobbing all over him and yet feeling more connected to him because of it. The invisible string of connection she'd felt between them since the first night she'd arrived on his doorstep pulled tighter. Which wasn't good, considering she was supposed to be here to assess his qualities as a caretaker and quite possibly fight him for custody of the twins. She couldn't lean on him, no matter how right it felt. She tucked her loose hair behind her ear and turned to focus on the twins instead, who'd fallen back to sleep in the stroller. We should get them out of there and into their cribs for a proper nap. Gage unfastened Brennan while Kylie did the same with Maya. Together they carried the babies back to the nursery and put them down to sleep. She lingered a minute to look at their sweet faces, thanking whatever force in the universe that had protected them. Slowly, she retreated from the nursery, suddenly unwillingly to be alone with Gage. He followed her back into the hallway. The scene by the door hung between them, feeling as heavy as an anvil. "We need to call the police and file a report," Gage said, his tone low and expression serious. "Whoever did this needs to be stopped so other people aren't at risk." Much as she didn't want to remember those terrifying moments at the park, Kylie nodded. "You're right. I don't want anyone." "You're safe now." Gage held her gaze for a moment, giving her silent reassurance. "Go make yourself a cup of tea. I'll call the station and have them send out someone to take your statement." He walked toward the living room, pulling his phone from his pocket. On still shaky legs, she went to the kitchen and brewed a pot of chamomile tea. While she went through the motions of preparing the drink, she did her best to regain her composure. By the time an officer showed up an hour later, she felt ready to answer his questions. "Was there anyone else present at the time of the theft?" the officer asked her after listening to her description of what had happened. "Besides the twins," Kylie said, thinking back. "There was a jogger. He stopped and asked if I was okay. He offered to call the cops for me, but I told him no, that I'd do it myself." In hindsight, another screw-up on her part. At least if the look on the officer's face was an indication. "I'm sorry I didn't report it sooner." The cop made a couple of notes on his tablet screen. "Can you go back to the park with me? Walk me through the route you took? Maybe we can find something the guy left behind." "I'll come with you," Gage volunteered. "No, I've got this," Kylie said, glancing over at him. She appreciated his willingness to offer support, but she felt she should be able to handle this on her own. "You stay here with the twins. I can do this. I'm fine." "Thanks, though." Gage didn't look thoroughly convinced, but nodded just the same. "Did you notice any distinguishing marks on the man who attacked you?" the cop asked, after they walked the half-block to the small park and were standing near the bench she'd sat on. "Tattoos, glasses, logos on his clothing?" Kylie closed her eyes and thought back to the man sitting opposite her, but couldn't remember anything odd or remarkable about him. No, nothing. Sorry. He was reading a newspaper and was dressed in all black. That's all I remember. All black? The officer asked to confirm as he took notes on his tablet. Try to remember the details of the event. What direction did he come at you from? Which way did he run off? As she described it again, a few more details came back to her. With the officer at her side, they retraced the steps she'd taken after the guy had stolen her diaper bag. He took off running that way, she said, her steps speeding up automatically as she remembered chasing the guy. I stopped here because the jogger got in my way, and the stroller was just too awkward to push while running. The cop nodded and continued down the sidewalk until he stopped and donned a pair of latex gloves to pick up something off the ground behind a tree 30 feet or so away. He walked back to Kylie, and as he got closer, she saw the object he'd retrieved. A newspaper. You said he was reading one when you first arrived, right? He held out the paper so she could see it. Yes. She frowned down at the front page. It was the Asahi Shimbun, Japan's leading newspaper. She'd gotten so used to seeing it on her last job that it took her a second to realize how out of place it was here. That's Japanese, yes? The officer asked. Was the guy who attacked you Asian? I don't know. I didn't really see his face all that clearly. It was hidden behind the paper at first, and then everything happened so quickly. She ignored the tiny niggle of tension eating into her gut. It was a strange coincidence that she felt she had to mention. It's weird, but I just got back from a job in Japan. Doing what? The cop asked. I'm a feng shui consultant. My clients live all over the world. She wasn't surprised at the way his eyebrow went up, betraying his skepticism. Whether you believe in what I do or not doesn't make it any less valid. And it doesn't change the fact I was mugged. My wallet was in there, my ID, and the bag itself holds a lot of sentimental value for me. Anything you can do to help me get it back would be appreciated. We'll do our best, ma'am. He placed the paper in a clear plastic bag. I'll book this into evidence when I get back to the station, and we'll see if we can get any prints off of it. I'll warn you now that it's unlikely, since it's been sitting in the elements for a while and there's no way to know who else might have handled it in the interim. Still, we'll do our best to find your assailant. They walked back toward Gage's house until they reached the officer's car. What now? She asked. She had no experience in this realm. If we find anything, I'll call you at the cell number you provided, the officer said. In the meantime, I suggest contacting your bank and credit card companies to freeze your accounts. You should also contact the Social Security office, if you had your card in your wallet, to see about getting a new one issued. He was right, and she had been keeping her Social Security card in her wallet since she hadn't wanted to leave it in her apartment when it was sublet. After he drove away, Kylie stood at the curb, watching his taillights disappear around the corner and praying they'd find the culprit soon. Gage did what he did best while Kylie was gone, kept busy. He took advantage of the sleeping twins to tidy up the house and put a load of laundry in the machine before he started dinner. By the time Kylie came back inside, sans cop, he had onions browning in a pan on the stove and was just adding garlic and peppers to the pasta sauce he planned to use for the spaghetti bolognese. She closed and locked the front door behind her, her movements slow and deliberate. After taking a scan of the room, she wandered over to take a seat in the kitchen while he worked. She looked exhausted and defeated by what had happened, which made him feel like a complete jerk for coming down so hard on her earlier about chasing the guy. Honestly, if he'd been in the same situation, he probably would have done the same thing. The only difference was, Gage would have caught him and made sure he never stole from anyone else again. That was part of his skill set. Everything taken care of with the police? He asked to engage her in conversation as he stirred the sautéed vegetables into a pot of simmering tomato sauce. They get what they need to catch the guy? I don't know, she replied with a shrug. It's not my world. Gage felt a nearly overwhelming urge to stop what he was doing and pull her close again, to comfort her. He stirred harder to distract himself. He had no business holding Kylie. Not now. Not ever. He had to admit, though, that despite the situation, it had felt good to have her in his arms for those few minutes by the front door. I told him what I remembered about the attack and walked him through the route we took at the park. Where I sat with the kids and where the guy was, she said. Her tone was laced with fatigue. Gage understood that. He'd experienced the feeling enough times himself while on missions. Just because more physical violence hadn't taken place didn't mean her body hadn't been prepared for it. Since she'd chased the perp, her reaction had definitely been fight and not flight. Now that all the raging adrenaline was clearing from her system, she was bound to be feeling empty and hollow. Kylie glanced over to where he was cooking, only then seeming to truly notice what he was doing. Anything I can help with? Having a task might help her, so he hiked his chin toward the loaf of French bread on the table. You can slice that up if you want, for garlic toast. Hope you like Italian. Love it. She gave him a weary smile as she stood up and grabbed the bread knife he'd left out. The cop did find something that might be evidence. He picked up a newspaper tossed behind a tree. It might be the one the guy was reading before he came after me. It was the Asahi Shimbun. Japanese. Gage looked back at her over his shoulder, scowling. Weird coincidence, since that's where you just came from, huh? Someone reading an Asian newspaper wasn't that unusual in Southern California, where the population was diverse. But that detail struck him as suspicious. Exactly what I thought. Has to be just chance, though. She sliced off thick hunks of bread and put them on the plate he'd set out. I'm sure lots of people in LA read that newspaper. True. Nevertheless, Gage filed the information away for later. They were both tired, and it was too late in the day to go poking around now, even if all his instincts were screaming at him to go check out the scene himself. He'd let the cops do their thing. If they found something, then he'd go ahead and check into it more. Once you're done cutting the bread, the container of garlic butter's in the fridge. I've got the oven preheated, so it's ready to go as soon as you're done. Great. She set the bread knife aside and sidled past him to get to the fridge. As they worked, things fell into a nice, easy routine. He'd noticed over the past few days that could happen. When they weren't at odds with each other, it could be almost comfortable, as if they were in sync. The twins should be up soon, right? She asked, as she spread a thick layer of butter onto a slice of bread before putting it onto a cookie sheet he'd handed her. Yeah. Gage looked at the clock. Nearly 6 now. The babies should be up any minute for dinner and a diaper change. Food, playtime, baths, and, if they were lucky, back to bed by 9. I'm hoping to get this ready to go before they wake up. Kylie made quick work of the rest of the bread before she nudged him aside so she could slip the cookie sheet into the oven. She brushed against his arm as she leaned past him to set the timer. The contact sent a frisson of awareness through him. Okay, that's done. What's next? Want me to set the table? Sure, that would be great, he said, tamping down the sizzles coursing through his bloodstream as best he could. With an effort, he tried not to notice how her shirt rode up each time she stretched on tiptoe to reach plates, revealing a sliver of her creamy skin to his view. It had been too long since he'd gotten laid. That had to be it. It wasn't a true attraction between them. At least that's what he kept telling himself. He was doing all right with that until she moved in beside him to grab some glasses from the cupboard, and his breath caught in his throat. Being 6 foot plus himself, he never gave much thought to keeping stuff on the top shelves since he could reach everything easily. But now, as Kylie teetered precariously on her tiptoes to grab the glasses above her, he realized he needed to rethink things, as long as she was staying here. Here, let me help, Gage said, reaching for a tumbler at the same time she did. Their hands met around the glass, and time seemed to slow as heat shimmered through his body from their point of contact. Kylie turned her head, her startled gaze meeting his, and he knew she felt the connection as strongly as he did, considering how her dilated pupils nearly obliterated the blue of her irises. They lowered the glass to the counter together, their fingers still touching. Only a few inches separated them, their breath synchronized, and his gaze flickered from her eyes to her parted pink lips, then back again. "Thanks," she murmured, her voice reedy and dreamlike. "You're welcome," Gage said, inching even closer to her as if drawn by a tractor beam. Closer, closer, so close, her warm breath fanned his face, and her sweet scent surrounded him. Suddenly kissing her seemed like the most necessary thing in the world. Never mind the warning bells going off inside the rational part of his mind. Those were quickly drowned out by lust and longing. One kiss, just one, then she'd be out of his system, and he'd be back to normal. Just one. His lips brushed hers once, twice. She didn't push him away or stop him. In fact, she leaned into him. Gage was just about to kiss her again, deeper this time, when a wail sounded from down the hall. Kylie jerked as if electrocuted and stepped back, her eyes wide. I should go check on them." In a blink she was gone, and Gage was left to stare after her, wondering when he'd lost his mind. Worse than that, how was he going to make it through the next couple of days with Kylie so near, and yet definitely out of his reach? Chapter 6. Kylie got the twins changed, while Gage stayed in the kitchen to finish making dinner, which was a relief. She was still trying to wrap her head around the fact she'd kissed him, or maybe he'd kissed her. However it happened, it must have been the residual stress of the attack earlier at the park. It was just leftover adrenaline looking for a way out of her system. Had to be. As she finished securing a clean diaper on Brennan, she continued to turn over in her mind the moment when Gage's lips had brushed hers, the way he'd tasted of mint with a touch of garlic from the sauce he'd been tasting, the way his breath had hitched ever so slightly, just the same as hers, the way his fingers had caressed her jaw, soft as butterflies. With a sigh, she tugged a new outfit up over the squirming little boy's legs, then fed his arms through the sleeves before snapping the front of the blue garment and snuggling him into the crook of one of her arms. "Welp, no matter how nice it was, it's not going to happen again, is it?" she said, staring down into Brennan's astonished blue eyes. From the look on her nephew's face, she'd just spouted the most brilliant thing in the world. He laughed and grinned up at her, all toothless wonder and drool. She couldn't help grinning herself, bending down to kiss his head before scooping up his sister in her other arm and carrying both kids back to the kitchen for a feeding. Grateful for something to keep her busy and alleviate the awkwardness now settling between her and Gage, Kylie put the twins in their high chairs and added a few Cheerios to the trays. They seemed to enjoy chasing around the little O's with their chubby fingers and gobbling them up. She opened 2 jars of baby food, apricots and green beans. The dinner Gage was making smelled way better. She glanced behind her. He looked good making it too. She spooned apricots into Maya's mouth, taking her time. Maybe the twins would eat super slow so she could avoid more alone time with Mr. Sex-on-Legs. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Brennan and Maya went through the jars of food in record time. She was debating opening another, but they seemed content with what they'd had, and she didn't want to overfeed them. That could get messy, a lesson she'd already learned. By the time she put them in their playpen with a selection of toys, Gage had their food on the table and was waiting for her to join him. She took the seat across from him, any appetite she'd had earlier gone in the face of her stupidity. Yes, the guy was hot. Yes, she felt a stronger attraction to him than any man in a long time. No, she should not act on that attraction in any way, shape, or form, regardless of whether he kissed like a dream or watched her now with those fathomless, sinful dark eyes of his. Desperately searching for something intelligent to say, Kylie's eyes caught on the bowl of pasta on the table. "Looks good." Yeah, not exactly Einstein-level conversation. "Thanks," Gage said, taking a long swallow of water before exhaling slow. "Listen, Kylie, about that kiss. Let's forget about it," she said, pouring far more dressing on her salad than was necessary. "Please. It was a mistake, that's all." "Yeah, sure," he said, after a brief pause. She hazarded a glance up at him and saw that he was scowling down at the basket of garlic bread. Somehow, he managed to look appealing despite his expression. Of course, it was a mistake. Shouldn't have happened. Won't happen again. No, it won't. She shoved a huge bite of lettuce and cheese in her mouth. Never mind, her lips were still tingling and parts of her anatomy long neglected were pulsing with need. Gage Winters was untouchable. Period. Determined not to spend one more second thinking about it, she waggled her fingers at the bread basket. "Can I have one of those pieces, please?" He handed her a slice of bread, placing it on the edge of her plate. Wise of him not to take the risk of them touching, given that that was what had sparked the kiss. No contact was her new policy. "Did the police mention when they might get back to you about the guy in the park?" Gage asked. Relieved by the change in subject, Kylie quickly answered, "No. Well, he said they'd check into it and call me if they got any leads. But I'm not holding out hope. I mean, it could have been anyone. I'm sure they have bigger crimes to deal with than a diaper bag theft. That paper, though, seems like a key clue to me." Gage filled his plate with pasta and salad, then dug in. He ate for a few minutes before speaking again. "California's pretty diverse, but I can't imagine many people still buy actual newspapers, and Japanese ones at that." Maybe. Now that she'd started eating, and they'd begun talking about something other than the kiss that could not be named, her appetite was returning full force. The fact the food was excellent helped as well. "Where'd you learn to cook like this? Dinner's amazing." "Thanks." He flashed her a sexy lopsided grin that highlighted his dimples and had her toes curling in her sandals again. Darn him. "I learned by the time I was in high school, mostly self-taught with the help of food blogs and old cookbooks." "You had to cook for yourself. Did your parents work long hours or something?" "I moved in with my uncle after my parents died, and he couldn't make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without messing it up." He spoke so matter-of-factly about the loss of his parents that she could only stare at him while he continued talking. "Once I got old enough, I started making stuff for myself and my uncle. I wasn't a gourmet, not by a long shot, but I was able to figure some things out. It was survival instinct, I suppose. If I wanted to live, I needed to cook." He had a half-smile on his face as he recalled the memories. "Over the years, my skills have come in handy. When we were on SEAL missions, I made meals for the guys on my team when we had a kitchen available to us. Now, with the twins here, I'm sure I'll be cooking a lot more again." "What's your specialty?" Kylie asked, hoping to keep the conversation going and enjoying this insight into him. "You're great at Italian, obviously. Anything else?" "I do a lot of Mexican and Asian food, too. I make a mean nasi lemak." "Yum!" Kylie sipped her water, then smiled at him, her tense shoulders relaxing for the first time since she'd fled the kitchen for the relative safety of the nursery earlier. Gage was easy to talk to when he wasn't oozing temptation all over her. "When I was working in Tokyo, there was a Malaysian restaurant down the road from the apartment where I was living. I used to go there for satay and roti canai. Girl, if you like satay, I'll have to make you my special chicken satay with peanut sauce next time. My buddy Dan in the SEALs called it an orgasm on a stick." Kylie snorted. "Seriously, I'm definitely up for that then. Bring on the orgasms, baby." And just like that, they were back to awkward again. She felt a blush rise on her cheeks and would have kicked her own butt if she could have. "Sorry, Gage stared down at his plate, clearly biting back a smile. "Look, we kissed. I'm pretty sure we both liked it, but it doesn't mean we need to repeat it again or walk around on eggshells because of it from here on out, right? Let's leave it in the past, as you said, and move forward. We're adults, after all." She nodded. "I'd like that." "Me too." He looked up and caught her eyes. "I have to admit that it's nice to have someone besides the twins around to talk to." "I bet." Her words emerged a tad softer than she'd intended because it was just so easy to get lost in his dark gaze and his smooth golden skin and... She cleared her throat. "Down, girl. Move forward, like you agreed. It's nice talking with you too." She tucked her hair behind her ear and took a bite of pasta. The tang of the tomatoes and brightness of the garlic danced on her tongue, perfectly complemented by spicy andouille sausage and the hint of parmesan. Silence fell between them while she thought back over their adult conversation. I'm sorry about your parents. I didn't know. It was a long time ago. Gage shrugged slightly. I don't remember my dad, except from photos and the stories my mom used to tell me. He died when I was a baby. He served in the Navy too. Really? Is that why you joined the SEALs? She asked around a bite of crusty, warm bread. Mostly. It felt like a way to form a connection with him. And what about your mom? She gently prodded. She passed away from cancer when I was 4. Oh my, I'm so sorry. That must have been horrible for you, Kylie said, feeling a nearly overwhelming urge to hug him. She forced herself to stay seated instead. Is that when you went to live with your uncle? Yes. He wiped his mouth and sat back, pushing away his empty plate. I owe him more than I can ever repay for taking me in. He was all the family I had left. He sounds like a great man. He did his best for me, Gage said. He passed away too after my first year of college. The somberness of his tone drove home the fact that Kylie was also now all alone in the world, just like Gage. Well, except for the twins, which made staying close to them even more imperative to her. She couldn't get over the strangeness of the circumstances, though. Just like the twins, Gage's parents died, and he had been raised by someone else. It almost seemed like history repeating itself. No wonder he seemed to be taking instant fatherhood in stride. He'd had a role model for that. After Uncle Derek died, I took time off of school to reflect on what I really wanted in life. Gage continued. That's when I decided to enlist, to honor my father's memory and to try and regain some direction in my life. Did it work? She asked, more interested in his answer than she cared to admit. He had way more depth and layers than she'd expected. It did, for 10 years. But then I felt I needed to leave my team. He'd hesitated, and she wondered why. I took a desk job with the Navy at first, but it wasn't a good fit. Finally, I decided to separate from the military altogether. I had just started some security work when Tucker and Christine's accident happened. Now, here I am. His expression was unreadable. On paternity leave, with 2 kids and no idea what I'm doing. The words struck so close to home that for a minute all Kylie could do was blink at him. Then she stood and began to clear their plates away. All this time, she'd managed to focus only on the idea that she was the twins' blood family, that she knew best, that they belonged with her. To have those notions shaken now was disconcerting. After what had happened earlier today, and her reckless behavior chasing after the guy with the twins in tow, she wasn't so sure she was the best guardian for the babies anymore. Maybe they were better off with Gage. He had a home, a stability to his life that she currently lacked. Too bad they couldn't stay like this, living together, raising the twins together. Kylie glanced toward where the babies played. They'd been content throughout the meal. She let herself indulge in the fantasy of both her and Gage being there for them for about 5 seconds before shoving that idea firmly aside. It was ridiculous to even consider it. Wasn't it? Yes, of course it was. Gage had his life. She had hers. Their 2 lives wouldn't meet because they couldn't meet. No amount of aligning chai and rearranging space could make that happen. Gage felt like a complete jerk as he pushed to his feet to help. Why did he have to bring up his past and all that death and then ramble on about it? Nothing put a quick kibosh on a nice dinner faster than bringing up all your deceased relatives. It was a stupid thing to have shared with her so openly. Promising himself not to bring it up again, he carried the dishes over to the counter while she continued to avoid looking at him and buzzed around putting away the leftovers. He hadn't been lying when he said it was nice having her around. He'd come to love the twins more than life itself. But still, baby gibberish and squeals were no substitute for adult companionship. Talking to Kylie about his parents and his uncle had got him thinking about his past, though. Got him thinking about the future, too, and what he really wanted. Honestly, he'd spent so much time focused on his independence, he'd avoided becoming tied down to anyone. But he'd had more than enough proof now that life was short and that it could end at any moment. What did he want his legacy to be? He was a father now, What choice for his future would be best for his kids? For the first time, he was seriously considering a wife, a partner to help raise the twins, and maybe to have more children with. Not that Kylie was that person. She had a big-time international career going, even if he had only a vague idea what it was she actually did, beyond the idea that it was interior decorating with a twist. Lots of creativity and artsy-fartsy stuff. Way different from his well-planned, well-organized life. Truthfully, they were polar opposites. He liked his order, liked research and planning and preparedness. She liked spontaneity and energy vibes and flying by the seat of her pants. They had no business even contemplating some kind of joint custody thing with the twins. For all he knew, she'd be on the next plane to somewhere exotic just as soon as her next client booked a furniture rearrangement. So, why then could he not seem to shake the notion of them co-parenting? Because he was losing his mind, that's why. There was no other explanation. He barely knew Kylie. The only other time he'd met her before this was at Tucker's wedding, for Pete's sake. And sure, she was pretty and funny and brave, considering a lot of people would have been terrified if they'd gotten mugged in the park. Not Kylie, though. She'd gone after the guy. Reckless? Yes. Brave? Undeniably so. Still, the rational part of his brain refused to abandon ship and let him run headlong into disaster. That just wasn't the way he operated. He led with his intellect, not his emotions. The consequences were disastrous when he let his feelings distract him. He'd proven that to himself in a way that he'd never forget, and his teammates, his friends, had paid the ultimate price. He let himself remember that for a moment before putting it back in its box and filing it away in his brain. It was important to remember his catastrophic mistake, but it wasn't healthy to dwell on it. What he needed to do was step back, reassess things between him and Kylie with a clear and logical eye. Forget the kiss, like he'd said, and stick with his original plan of raising the kids on his own. Lots of people did that. He could too. Kylie finished boxing up the pasta and putting it into the fridge while he shoved the leftover garlic bread into a plastic baggie. Feeling like he needed to say something to break the silence, Gage went with the first thing that popped into his head. "You're doing really well with the twins. I figure taking care of them now is good practice for when you have your own someday." She stiffened beside him at the counter, and Gage got the distinct impression he'd stepped in it somewhere again, though he wasn't sure exactly where. Before he could ask her what was wrong, she'd wiped her hands off on a dish towel and started out of the kitchen. "Since the babies are quiet, I'm going to take a shower," Kylie said as she headed down the hall. "Thanks again for dinner. It was really great." Once again, Gage was left behind, watching her walk away, just like with a kiss. Avoidance must be her go-to defense mechanism when things got messy, at least messy emotionally. While keeping an eye on the kids, he finished putting away the remains of their dinner and cleaning up the kitchen, humming to himself as he went, and reminding himself that this was exactly why relationships never worked out for him. His last girlfriend, the one he'd been dating before his last disastrous tour in Afghanistan, had complained he'd been too distant, too cold. At the time, he'd been exhausted from fighting with her about it all the time, so he'd just dropped it. Later, after he'd returned home, still knee-deep in grief over his lost teammates, he hadn't had the emotional bandwidth left to try and mend their relationship, so they'd both agreed to end it. But now, with Tucker and Christine gone and the twins under his care, emotional connections were more important than ever, and more difficult than ever too. He doubted himself, and doubted his ability to ever forge real bonds with anyone. What if his girlfriend had been right? What if he was incapable of connecting with anyone deeply? What if he failed the twins? What if... The sound of running water from the shower echoed down the hall as he settled on the sofa to watch some TV and hopefully get his head back on straight. Doubting himself now, no matter how justified, wouldn't help matters. Besides, Kylie wasn't his girlfriend. They were temporary housemates and shared a connection because of the kids. Nothing more. The sooner he remembered that and kept his life and his heart to himself, the better. Chapter 7. The next morning, Kylie was up early, determined to put the stress of the previous day behind her and get on with things. Never mind the way that Gage's comment about her having kids of her own someday was still stuck in her head. Never mind the way that her last boyfriend had broken up with her because she couldn't give him babies. Never mind that Gage Winters was not now, nor would he ever be, her boyfriend. One kiss did not a relationship make, even if said kiss still made her insides shiver with want. She dialed the number to the Social Security office on her cell phone, then walked over to the windows in the living room to stare out at the sunny day beyond. She'd managed to get through to her credit card companies the night before to cancel her existing cards and get new ones issued, but she had only gotten a recording from the government when she'd called. Typical. Luckily, there'd been no activity on her cards yet, so that was good, she supposed, if a bit odd. When she'd been in college, she'd lost her purse at a party once, and within a few hours, whoever had taken it had racked up over $1,000 in charges to her account. The call to the Social Security office picked up, and she listened to all of the annoying prompts. Hit 1 for English, hit 3 to report a lost card, enter number, wait, hold for the next available human. With a sigh, Kylie glanced back at Gage, who was still feeding the twins in the kitchen. He was smiling at them as he moped up applesauce running off Brennan's chin. To her, he'd been quieter this morning, more distant. But maybe that was for the best. The more they kept to themselves, the easier things would be all around. She already liked the guy far more than she should, given that she was here to possibly take the twins away from him. And yes, so far he'd been a perfect doting dad, changing them, feeding them, playing with them, even singing them to sleep at night. He probably didn't know she'd overheard that last one. But since she was sleeping on the sofa and the nursery was just right down the hall and everything, it was hard not to catch his rendition of "Oh, child." A burst of warmth spread from her chest outward to her extremities at the memory. So sweet. Thank you for calling the Social Security Administration. My name is Ben. Please repeat the last 4 digits of your Social Security number for safety reasons. The guy's voice jarred her from her reverie, and Kylie did as he asked, before relaying the story of her stolen wallet for the umpteenth time, and finally getting confirmation from him that her card would be reissued. Ben also gave her a stern warning about carrying her card in her wallet. Yeah, she got that. It wouldn't happen again. She went online and set credit alerts, so she'd instantly know if anyone tried to use her Social Security card to open an account or take out a loan. This was such a pain. Frustrating, too. She tried to center herself and think about her next steps. Finding work was top of her list. She should spend some time today searching through her referrals for a new client in the area. She didn't need the money right away since she had plenty saved up in the bank to last her a good couple of months without new work. But she liked to stay busy. She also needed to find a new place to stay in town while she dealt with the issues of the twins' custody. Something temporary to hold her over until the end of the rental period for the subletter currently in her apartment. Not that Gage's place wasn't nice. It was. But if she was going to challenge his guardianship, she couldn't be his house guest too. That would be awkward. So was the memory of their kiss. A little distance from him was needed since her attachment to him was growing stronger each day. For lots of reasons, it would be best to have a place of her own. Not least because she couldn't face another comment like the one he'd made last evening about her having kids of her own someday. That was a definite no-go where she was concerned. First, though, breakfast. She walked to the kitchen, feeling a little thrill when the babies smiled at her. They recognized her and trusted her. That felt good despite everything else. Since he'd made her such a nice dinner the previous evening, she decided that the least she could do was return the favor today. Kylie went straight to the fridge, pulling out all the makings for a lovely frittata. Eggs, cheese, onions, tomatoes, fresh spinach, and mushrooms, and set them on the counter before preheating the oven. "Hope you're hungry," she said to Gage. She glanced over her shoulder as she began mixing together the ingredients in a large bowl. "I make a mean breakfast." "I know." He looked up at her with a ready smile, reminding her that they'd already shared a breakfast. It was a surprisingly intimate moment, and yes, I'm starving. Good. She shook off the confusing morass of feelings and turned back to her work. This should be ready shortly. Perfect. That will give me time to get the twins bathed and dressed for the day. There was that intimacy again. It felt nice, homey even, with her cooking and him caring for the kids. She whisked together the frittata, then poured it into a baking dish and put it in the oven before setting the timer. Gage was humming again, a tune she couldn't quite name, as he got the twins ready down the hall. It only served to endear him to her more, which wasn't good. She pushed the lever down on the toaster with more force than was necessary, before setting the table for two. Then she cooked up some turkey bacon in the microwave and set that on a plate in the middle of the table. By the time Gage returned and put the twins in their playpen with their toys, she had the table heaped with food. Sure, it was a lot for two people, but hey, taking care of kids took energy. They needed to fuel up. "Breakfast is ready," she called to him from across the room. Gage took the seat across from her at the table, his spot giving him a clear line of sight on the babies in the playpen, in case anything went awry. He eyed the array of food and smiled. "This looks amazing." "Thanks." She filled a plate for herself. "Most important meal of the day." "True." He took a huge bite of frittata and moaned his appreciation. "So good." "Thanks." Heat rose in her cheeks, both because of his compliment and also because that moan of his had immediately gotten her thinking about other times and situations when he might make similar sounds. Naughty, Kylie. So naughty. She cleared her suddenly constricted throat and dug into her own food. After a few minutes of eating in silence, she said, "I thought I'd go hunting for a temporary apartment. Check my client list too and see if anyone in town needs a consultation. Since I'll be here a while, I should get settled a bit. What's the hurry?" He blinked at her a couple of times, clearly confused, then frowned down at his plate. "I thought this arrangement was working out pretty well for now." His statement seemed a far cry from the night she'd arrived when he'd been reluctant to let her stay. At that time, he had also made it clear to her that it was very temporary. "If you're sure you don't mind having me on your couch a little longer." "Not at all, and I thought maybe, if you weren't busy, you might like to come with me and the twins to the nature preserve nearby. After what you went through yesterday, some peace and quiet might be good for you. And like I said, there's no hurry to get out of here. With your credit cards and stuff up in the air, it might be better to wait until that's all settled anyway. Most leases require a credit check, even short-term ones." He was right. She hadn't thought that far ahead. It would be difficult to get through the process of renting with the blocks she'd put on her credit, and she didn't even have a debit card at the moment to put down the security deposit. "If you're worried about being out in the open," he said, apparently mistaking her lack of response for fear, "I've got your back. I might have left the SEALs, but the SEALs never leave the man." Kylie grinned despite herself. "They should use that slogan on the recruitment posters." Gage chuckled. "Yeah, right. Seriously, though, if you want to come with us today, I'd be happy for the help. No pressure, though, or anything." He looked away again, appearing a bit flustered. "Whatever you want to do." While he devoured more food, she considered her options. Frankly, she was still tired from the day before. She'd slept restlessly, waking up every so often as images of the guy in the park had invaded her dreams. Her main concern with sleeping on Gage's couch had been overstaying her welcome. But if he wasn't in a hurry, and they both kept their hands and lips to themselves, a few more days shouldn't hurt anything. Plus, a day outside in nature sounded beyond blissful. Her energies were all in a tangle from the mugging and the kiss. Fresh air and sunshine would do wonders for getting her straightened out again. "You know," she said at last, coming to a decision, "I'd love to go to the nature preserve with the three of you." "Awesome." He grinned at her from across the table, his smile radiant, and her breath caught despite her wishes. "After we finish eating and cleaning up, I'll get the stroller packed and we can go." She nodded and focused on finishing her food. Not that she was really tasting it. As much as she was looking forward to spending the day outside with the twins, being close to Gage all day would definitely put her willpower to the test. He wasn't even trying to flirt with her. At least she didn't think he was, and already she was under his spell. If she wasn't careful, She'd fall right over into lust with the guy, and then it was only a few quick hops and they'd end up in the sack together. Kylie was all for fun little flings. If anything, after her last breakup, she'd decided flings were what worked best for her. No commitment, no talk of the future and family. Gage wasn't fling material. Something about Gage warned her that a night with him wouldn't be a one and done. He was the kind of guy that had forever written all over him. Women like her, who couldn't give a man like him the children he so obviously wanted and deserved, couldn't do long-term romance. The thought that a real relationship was forever off limits to her was so disheartening. She'd tried to make peace with it. After all, she'd had years to accept that she would be childless. It still got her, though. She picked at what was left on her plate before standing and carrying her dishes over to the sink. "I'll take care of this stuff. Why don't you focus on packing the stroller so we can get out of here?" He set his plates on the counter beside her, his arm brushing hers and sending fresh zings of awareness through her left side. "I'm glad you're coming with us." "Me too," she murmured, not looking at him. She briefly wondered if she could still get out of the little trip. At the same time, she knew that whether or not she went with them today, it was already too late for her to withdraw. Despite all her efforts, Gage had wormed his way beneath her barriers, and now she wasn't sure she'd ever get him out of her system, or if she even wanted to. A few hours later, Gage pulled into a spot near the scenic overlook he liked to visit and jammed the transmission of his SUV into park. Kylie had been awfully quiet in the passenger seat since they'd left his house. Amazingly, the kids had been too. They'd happily babbled to each other and finally fallen asleep for the last 15 minutes of the trip. He'd have to remember that they liked car rides. He wasn't so sure about his adult companion. He'd tried to get Kylie talking several times to no avail. He hoped maybe the nature would do the trick. Not that he planned on getting too deep into things with her, but not talking was awkward too. And he was still curious about why she'd fled the kitchen so quickly the night before. "Here we are," he said, with far more enthusiasm than required. "I'll get the stuff unloaded from the back, if you want to get the twins out." "Sure," she said, not looking at him as she exited the vehicle. Yep. Something was up there. Even a guy who kept to himself like Gage could tell. They'd stopped at a deli on the way up here and picked up a couple boxed lunches for them. He'd packed the backpack that was now serving as the twins' diaper bag before he'd left the house with changes of clothing for both and plenty of baby food options. They were about 2 hours from home near Puerco Canyon and the ocean. There were several nature spots closer to his house, but Gage liked the views from here and the weather was perfect. Besides, none of them had anywhere to be, so why not enjoy the gorgeous day? He walked over to a clearing with a view of the canyon below and the Pacific in the distance, and spread out the plaid blanket he'd brought on the ground before setting the cooler atop it, along with the diaper bag. Then he went back to the SUV to help with the twins. Once they were all settled on the blanket and the babies had been changed and fed, he and Kylie sat and ate their lunches while soaking in the peaceful vibes of the area. "Hey, in case I said something to upset you last night, I'm sorry," he said, around a bite of his Italian sub. She shook her head, still staring out over the beautiful vista below. "No, it's fine." A shadow of sadness passed over her face. So fast Gage might have missed it if he hadn't been watching her so closely. She nibbled on her veggie burger and sighed. "You know, I always wanted a family of my own, but never imagined it would happen so suddenly with the twins arriving," he said, not sure why he was continuing to spill his guts to her. He'd done that the night before, too. It was surprisingly easy to talk to her, and it felt nice to have someone he could share things with again. Since leaving the Navy, he'd been a bit of a loner. It was even worse now, without his best friend. Before Kylie arrived, he'd been feeling very alone. It helped that Kylie had a great smile, and, for some reason, he wanted to see it again. "Honestly, a lot of the time I doubt I'll make a good father. With what happened to my parents and all, I have no idea what I'm doing. Probably shouldn't tell you that, considering the position we're in with custody and all, but you're a natural at being a father," she said, glancing over at him finally. "You do great with the twins." Thanks. That's nice to hear. Especially since he didn't think she was just saying it to make him feel good. You do really well with them, too. Kylie gave a small shrug, her expression still bleak. I always wanted kids of my own. He almost said she'd make a great mother someday, but stopped himself, remembering that he'd said something similar the previous night just before she'd fled the room. He couldn't be sure that was what had set her off, but it was the best guess he had. Still, she'd opened the door a crack and he wanted inside, so instead he tried a different tack. They're a huge responsibility, though. Hard to raise a family when you're also trying to build a career. I'm sure it is. Kylie held his gaze a moment before returning her attention to the view. It's spectacular here. I've never been. Whenever I was missing my parents, had a fight with my uncle, or was struggling in school, I'd come up here and just sit for a few hours. Something about this place clears my mind and heals my heart. I understand about places that can do that for you. This one is special, she said. The sadness lacing her tone had turned to reverence instead, as she gazed out over the natural beauty surrounding them. The twins, who had been crawling around on the blanket and expending lots of energy in the fresh air, were now playing with a set of brightly colored stacking cups. I think they like it too. He gestured to the content kids. A slight breeze blew, rustling the leaves in the trees and carrying the scent of pine and earth and the far-off fragrance of the sea. At home, things might be chaotic and confusing, but here in their own private bubble, all seemed right with the world. Seemed so. She took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly, her shoulders sagging slightly. He waited, knowing something was coming, something difficult for her to discuss. The reason I don't have kids of my own is because I can't have kids of my own. Gage blinked, taking that in. So that was why his comment had upset her so much. He wished he could take it back. I'm sorry, Kylie. Me too. Kylie gave a sad little ironic snort. I was diagnosed with endometriosis in college. The condition makes it difficult, if not impossible, to conceive. My boyfriend at the time acted like he was okay with it at first, but then he broke up with me because he wanted a family of his own. Since then, the few men I've told about my condition have hightailed it out of my life pretty quick. She shook her head and smiled. A brittle affair. I get it. I do. I'm broken, defective. No guy wants to marry that. Moving slowly, Gage sat up, not wanting to startle her. He moved in closer beside her and gazed out over the landscape, his arm brushing hers. For the record, you're not broken or defective. And there are plenty of other ways to have a family besides childbirth. Just look at me and the twins, or me and my uncle. Sometimes the families you choose yourself are even better than the ones you're born into. It's the bonds that matter, the connections, not the blood. For a while, she didn't respond, just stared out at the horizon, and Gage started to worry that he'd said the wrong thing again. Then she leaned in to kiss his cheek and smiled brighter than the sun in the sky, and his whole universe tilted in the best way. Thank you for that. Any time, he said, his voice cracking slightly. He realized that regardless of his preference for being alone, his life had changed the minute the twins had entered it. Now, with Kylie there, everything was evolving again. It should have scared him, but the truth was that the future seemed a little less lonely and bleak because of it, even if his time with her was only temporary. He still wasn't sure about all her energy and vibes nonsense, but there was definitely something to be said for their sizzling connection right now. Maybe they couldn't share a future, but they could enjoy the time they had together today. Chapter 8. The longer the afternoon went on, the more comfortable and relaxed Gage felt. Once they'd finished lunch and taken a walk with the twins, he and Kylie were settled once more on the blanket on the overlook, just enjoying the scenery and each other's company. If he were honest with himself, he hadn't had such an enjoyable day in a long time. Having her open up about her condition seemed to have dissolved the barriers between them and made him feel closer to her somehow. instead of being alarmed by that, as he usually was whenever true intimacy was involved. It just felt, well, right. Not that he planned to do anything more than talk with her today. But if, maybe something between them developed later, Gage wouldn't entirely object either. After all, they were both consenting adults. They both had pasts and painful things they were dealing with. They both obviously needed someone to talk to and had found a kind and considerate ear in each other, at least for the time being. Everything could change tomorrow, of course. Gage knew that all too well, but for now things between him and Kylie were good. Maya did an army crawl across the blanket over to where Brennan was slobbering all over a set of plastic keys and attempted to grab them away from him. Brennan fussed and shook his little arms angrily. Gage couldn't help but laugh. "I never had siblings, but I assume that's normal, one always trying to take something from the other." Kylie smiled at the babies and shook her head. "Not always. I mean, don't get me wrong. Me and my sister had our share of fights growing up, but most of the time we stood up for each other." Her gaze narrowed and her sunny grin dissolved into grief. "I miss her so much. Stupid, right? She's not even been gone a month, and it's not like we saw each other or even talked every day. But just knowing she was there made me feel safer somehow. Does that make sense?" "It does." Gage reached over to pick up the set of keys Brennan had dropped and hand them back to the little boy. "I felt the same about the teammates I lost during a SEAL mission." She sighed and reached over to smooth Maya's wind-blown, downy hair back into place. "That must be so hard, going to work every day, knowing you might die or lose someone close to you." This time it was Gage's turn to shrug. "Surprisingly, even though the threat is always there, you don't think about it much. At least I didn't, not until it happened. Then it was all I could think about." Some days, it still was. Since the kid's arrival in his life, though, he'd been so busy that it had been easier to keep the pain at bay. He'd pushed it aside and compartmentalized it. "Is that why you left? Because something happened?" Kylie picked Maya up and held her on her lap, clapping the baby's hands together softly. Yeah, he didn't want to explain it all to her, and some of it he literally couldn't share. It was classified information, but she'd been so open with him that he felt he owed her the same honesty. "There was an incident. My fault. The investigation cleared me officially, but no tribunal could take away the sense of responsibility I felt, and still feel. Once I was cleared, I could have returned to active duty, but I chose to transfer to a desk job. My heart wasn't in fieldwork anymore. A desk job wasn't the right fit either, though, so I resigned my commission and transitioned to security work. Then Tucker and Christine's accident happened, and all my priorities changed." She rocked slowly, cradling the baby against her. Maya's eyes were getting heavy, but that wasn't what Gage was watching. He didn't think he'd ever seen Kylie look more peaceful or beautiful, and that was saying something because the woman was 24/7 gorgeous. It was clear to him, too, that she was meant to be a mother, whether she was able to have children biologically or not. She looked so natural and content with a baby in her arms as she looked at the vista, seemingly lost in thought. "What's bothering you?" he asked. "You're perceptive," she said, and he wanted to tell her that wasn't it. He was somehow in tune with her, not that he could explain how that had happened. "I'm bothered about my actions in the park. The more I think about it, the angrier I get at myself for taking off after that guy the way I did. If anything had happened to the twins, I would never have forgiven myself. With Christine gone, I'd do anything in the world to protect them. They're all the family I have left." "Same here." He hiked his chin toward where Brennan had dozed off on the blanket with a plastic key dangling from his mouth. "Looks like it's nap time again." "Agreed," she whispered, carefully moving over to secure a snoozing Maya into her carrier seat. Gage did the same with Brennan, placing both kids in the shade. When Gage was sure the kids were good, he moved back to his spot on the blanket beside Kylie. He rested his arms atop his knees and stared out at the ocean in the distance. "When I come here and it's so quiet and peaceful, it makes me realize that slowing down isn't such a bad thing after all. There's a lot to be said for taking time to enjoy what I've got here in front of me." "True," She tucked her hair behind her ear, her arm brushing against his with the movement. "For years now, I've been traveling from one place to the next, working hard to make everyone else's life more harmonious. But I never stopped to think about my own space. What I really want." He glanced sideways at her. "You think you could be happy settling down?" "Maybe." Kylie looked back at the twins, then at him, her pretty blue gaze flickering down to his lips before returning to his eyes again and making him remember their kiss from the other night. "I think I might be willing to try." Time seemed to slow as she leaned slightly toward him, and he did the same. Familiar caution had him holding back before his lips met hers. "Are you sure about this, Kylie? Last time you said kissing me was a mistake and we should forget it." Like he ever could. One side of her full pink lips quirked up into a crooked grin. "I'm not sure about anything these days, but I will say that being with you might be my favorite mistake." Corny girl. So corny. Still, the line must have worked because next thing Kylie knew, she was in Gage's arms, and he was kissing her like there was no tomorrow. There was nowhere else on earth she wanted to be. Everything seemed to fade away as he pulled her tighter to him, and his tongue swept between her lips to tangle with hers. He tasted of spices and basil and garlic from lunch, and she couldn't seem to get enough of him. She twined her arms around his neck and hung on for dear life. Back at his house the other night, the walls had seemed to close in on them during their brief kiss, crushing her with grief and the weight of her responsibilities. But now, with the fresh air and the sunshine and nothing but open spaces for miles, Kylie felt like she could finally relax and give herself up to the desire coursing through her veins. Gently, Gage laid her down on the blanket, then stretched out beside her. She'd never been much of an exhibitionist, but he had her seriously reconsidering her life choices. The warm pressure of his muscled body beside hers, the feel of his hands touching her, stroking her, teasing her to arch into him, had her breath panting and her heart racing. It had been so long, too long, since she'd been with a man she truly felt connected with on an emotional level, and it was both overwhelming and perfect, all at the same time. Kylie dug her fingers into his shoulders, his strong back, his hips, kneading him closer. Closer, as close as she could get him. She reached for the button on his jeans, wanting him even closer, but he caught her hand and kissed the inside of her wrist instead. But later, he leaned down and kissed her before sitting up. Wait until tonight. Giggling from the way he waggled his brows with his last words, Kylie sat up and kissed him again before turning to look back at the twins. "We should probably start heading home, huh?" "Yeah." He stood and then held his hand out to help her up. She came to her feet and was instantly in his arms. "Another kiss to tide me over," he whispered against her lips, before taking them in a kiss that threatened to incinerate them both. "I like that." He put a few inches between them, but seemed reluctant to leave the spot. She pressed her face into his shoulder as they held each other in the late-day sunshine. When a bird burst into song nearby, the moment was almost too perfect, like something from a movie. Not perfect, but good. Better than Kylie had thought possible even a few weeks ago when she'd gotten the crushing news of her sister's death. That good was owning to Gage. He seemed to get her, and he always knew what to say. He even came up with the perfect words when she'd told him about her endometriosis. She heard a small snort and turned to see Brennan watching them. His eyes were still sleepy and drifted closed again seconds later. "Time to go," Gage said in a low voice. "With luck, we can make it another hour before they wake up fully. Then we'll make a pit stop to feed and change them along the way." "Sounds good." They picked up their things before walking down the short path to their SUV. Once they'd gotten the stuff loaded in the car and the twins secured in the back seat again, Kylie climbed into the passenger seat and buckled in while Gage did the same behind the wheel. He started the engine, but he didn't start driving, just sat there, staring out at the view once more. "I had a really great time today. Thank you for bringing me here," she said, suddenly feeling shy. "Thank you for sharing your past with me, too." "You're welcome," Gage said, reaching over to tip her chin up. forcing her to meet his gaze. "And thank you for telling me about your endometriosis. I meant what I said before, too. You're not broken or defective. You're wonderful. Everything about you." Heat prickled her cheeks, and she shook her head, trying to deflect the pang of yearning in her heart conjured by his words. At that moment, she wanted nothing more than to stay in this little paradise with him and the babies. It wasn't reality, though. He'd implied that they might have something together past the afternoon, something that could potentially last long-term. But she worried he hadn't really thought things through. She refused to allow herself to put too much stock in his words. For now, she resolved to just enjoy the present, because she knew too well that for a man, giving up on the idea of having biological children of his own was a big deal. Relationships fell apart over that, and if that happened here, with Gage, she would be the one to get hurt. So she opted to keep it light between them. "You're just saying that because I let you feel me up." "Nah." He winked, then kissed the tip of her nose. "I'm saying that because it's true. Someday, you'll make a guy very lucky." "Yeah?" She couldn't resist reaching over to place her hand on the inside of his thigh, her grin growing in direct response to the twitching of his still semi-hard bulge in his crotch. "Sure you don't want to get lucky right now." His response emerged more as a growl. "Stop tempting me, woman." "Fine." She chuckled as he pulled out of their parking spot and headed back through the nature preserve to the highway beyond. Flirting with him was nearly as satisfying as the actual act of sex, which was both new and exhilarating. She'd been with her share of men over the years, but it had been a long time since one of them had been more than a quick tumble in the dark. She cultivated her hippie party girl persona as armor, a way to keep her true self hidden away and protected. But with Gage, she felt fully engaged, body, mind, spirit, and that was possibly the greatest aphrodisiac of all. The greatest risk, too, considering that once they did sleep together, Kylie was certain he'd end up stealing her heart as well. Which made sense, because after today, she was pretty sure he'd already captured her soul. Chapter 9. By the time they pulled into the driveway of Gage's house, Kylie felt about as zen as she had since before the accident. Hard to believe with all the emotions churning inside her, but it was true. Being in nature had helped. So had the time with Gage. As if reading her thoughts, he glanced over at her as he cut the engine and grinned. "I'm glad you came today." "Me too." She unbuckled her seatbelt and climbed out to get the twins from the back seat, while Gage went to unlock the front door and turn the lights on inside. She got Maya's carrier seat out and set it on the ground near her feet, then started on Brennan's. But before she finished, Gage was back. She looked at him over her shoulder and spotted his scowl. His body language was tense, and he somehow seemed larger than usual. "What's wrong?" "Someone's broken into the house," he said, pulling out his phone. "I did a preliminary sweep of the interior but didn't find anyone inside. Stay near the car with the kids. I'm calling the police." She returned Maya's seat to the car and got back in. The twins were awake and starting to get restless, so she played with them as best she could to distract them. She half listened while Gage relayed what he'd seen during his brief visit inside. With each word, her stomach cramped harder. "Yeah, from what I can see," he said. "The lock was forced. Hard to tell if anything's missing since the living room's trashed. No one inside. Yep, we'll wait out front in the yard." She hopped out of the car when Gage hung up. He walked over to her. She must have looked as worried as she felt because he wrapped his free arm around her and pulled her into his side. "Hey, it's okay. The cops are on their way. The officer I talked to is a former Marine and a good man. I know him from my time in the SEALs. He'll figure out who did this. Best keep the twins in the car until we make sure everything's secure." She nodded and blinked hard against the unexpected sting of tears. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't. It was just the last few days had been such a roller coaster. Until the mugging in the park, she'd never dealt with the police in her life, and now this would make twice in less than 48 hours. It felt like something out of a nightmare. Minutes later, a squad car pulled up at the curb. Lights blazing, no sirens, followed by a black Chevy Impala. Two uniformed officers climbed out of the patrol car and a guy in a suit from the sedan. Gage's friend, she'd guess. The trio walked up to where they were standing in the yard near the car. She recognized one of the uniformed cops as the same guy from the park incident. He tipped his hat at her and pulled out his small notebook again. "Ma'am, sorry we meet again so soon." "Agreed." She pressed closer into Gage's side, grateful for his warmth and support, both physically and emotionally. "Winters," the guy in the suit said to Gage. "Sorry about the break-in." "Yeah." He let Kylie go to shake the man's hand, and she missed his embrace almost immediately. Then Gage took her hand, and she felt better. "Detective Brent Carlisle, this is Kylie Fredericks, Christine's sister. She had to come back from an extended trip when she got the news about the crash, so she's staying with me until she gets her situation settled." "Hi," the detective said, shaking her hand as well. "I'm so sorry about your sister. She was a great person. Tucker was a good friend of mine, and the few times my wife and I went out with him, we had fun." "Thank you." Kylie forced a smile. "It's been a difficult few weeks. I'm sure this doesn't help either." Carlisle gestured toward the house and hiked his chin at Gage. "Want to take me inside and show me what happened?" "Follow me." They started toward the porch, then stopped. Gage turned back to her. "You okay out here by yourself?" She didn't want to get in the way, but the thought that someone might still be watching the house creeped her out. "I'd feel better with you." "Stay with the officers. Let us make sure it's safe first," the detective said. "Once we've cleared the interior, you can come in, okay?" Kylie gave a reluctant nod, returning to the SUV and the twins while Gage and his friend disappeared inside. One of the uniformed officers waited with her while the other one, the one from the park, walked the perimeter of the property, checking for suspects and clues, she assumed. She waited anxiously until they all returned. "It's clear," Gage said, helping her get the car seats out of the back seat. "Let's get inside." They walked through the busted front door, and Kylie couldn't help but gasp. The living room was trashed, furniture overturned, cushions slashed, knickknacks shattered. There didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it at all. The ransacked crime scenes she'd seen on TV always looked a mess, but the reality was so much worse, probably because everything here belonged to someone she cared about. Gage seemed to be taking it well, considering. He still seemed calm and steady, even though his handsome face was pale beneath his tan and his dark eyes were hard and haunted. Kylie gasped when she noticed the spray painting on the walls. At first it looked like gibberish, but the more she stared at the neon crimson marks, the more they started to resemble things she'd seen before. She recognized the characters from her time in Tokyo. Her heart dropped to her toes. Was this something she'd brought on them? "Why would someone do this?" she asked, more to herself than anyone. "We're going to figure that out," Detective Carlisle said. "The crime scene unit should be here soon to dust for prints and check for other evidence of who's responsible." He walked closer to where the red spray paint was running down a wall in a blood-like trail. "Never seen a burglar do this before. Seems more like vandalism." "Anyone got a grudge against you, Winters?" "Not that I know of," Gage said. "I've only been back in town a couple of months. Before that, I was overseas on a mission." "I got mugged the other day," Kylie said before she could think better of it. "I was in the park with the twins and some random guy mugged me and stole the diaper bag." "But why would that guy decide to break into your house too? It's not as if he got your keys. He had to force the door. Muggers usually go for easy targets." "Why would he go to all this trouble?" Gage said. "I don't know." She spoke slowly, thinking it through. "It just seems like too much of a coincidence, two attacks so close together. And if there was something more the mugger wanted from me, he'd know to come here. The diaper bag had a tag on it with your name and address." She remembered being surprised that Gage had already thought to change the address from Christine and Tucker's house to his. It spoke of his practical, highly organized personality. "Maybe," he admitted. The twins started fussing in unison, and Gage walked to the kitchen and set Maya's carrier down on the table. He took her out of her seat and held her against his shoulder. It doesn't explain the rest of this, though. It might. Kylie followed his lead, getting Brennan out of his seat and carrying him in her arms. Those marks on the walls? They look like Japanese writing, like characters I saw back when I was working in Tokyo. But why would someone do that? Gage frowned. I've never been to Japan, and you were there for work, right? You weren't even there for that long, not nearly as long as you'd planned to be. What's the worst you could have done to someone? Arranged their furniture so their energy was messed up? He chuckled, trying to make light of it. But she wasn't having it. My work isn't something to laugh at, and neither is this. First, there was that Japanese newspaper the guy left behind, and now this. What if they're connected? What if this is my fault somehow? Her head hurt, and her heart pounded. If it was true that she'd somehow brought all of this on him and the twins, she'd never forgive herself. And yet, something inside her told her that there was a link between the incident in the park and the home break-in. Someone had intentionally left clues pointing to Japan. She studied the characters but didn't know what they meant. She looked away and closed her eyes, guilt crashing over her and threatening to pull her under once more. Hey, Gage said, coming up beside her and looping an arm around her shoulder. His action brought the two of them and the babies close together. The four of them united felt comforting, but the sensation only lasted a moment. Hey, don't blame yourself. The only one to blame is the guy who did this. It isn't your fault, okay? Kylie, Detective Carlisle called to her. Can you check to see if any of your items are missing? I assume this is your suitcase and backpack by the couch? She nodded, and with one last lingering look at Gage, walked into the other room to check her things. It only took her a second to see that something was missing, something important. Oh, no. What? Gage asked, moving in to stand beside her. Did they take something? Yes, my laptop. I left it plugged in right there. She pointed to a low table. Maybe it's here, hidden in the mess. They did a quick search. It broke her heart to see the baby's toys scattered around carelessly, some of them dirtied or torn. As if losing their parents wasn't enough, everything they owned was violated. I don't see it. Gage had joined in the search while Detective Carlisle checked with the other officers to see if one of them had found it. It doesn't appear to be here, the detective said, returning to them. Can you detail what was on it? Everything. Who didn't have their life on their laptop? She held back the panic and made herself think so she could answer his question. All my work information is on there. Lists of clients, addresses, billing information, notes about what I did for them. What kind of clients? Kylie brings people's homes in line with the concept of feng shui, Gage answered before she could. His voice held not one bit of mocking about her profession, and she was surprised to see the detective just nod and take a note. No derision from either of them. That was improvement, and she'd be glad about it if everything else didn't suck. My laptop is connected to my phone and my tablet, she said. If they have that and can hack my passwords, they can access all my devices, get into everything. She straightened, feeling dizzy and slightly nauseated at the power someone could have over her. What am I going to do? Shh. Gage pulled her into a hug with his free hand. The twins cradled between them once again. We're going to get through this, all right? Whatever is happening, you're not alone. Partners, remember. He pulled back and looked into her eyes, his voice calm and steady, soothing the rising tide of panic inside her. Now, go ahead and pack up what you can of your stuff. Pack bags for the twins, too. Then wait for me by the door. As soon as I give my statement to Carlisle, we'll go to a hotel for the night. I'll get someone in here tomorrow morning to fix the door and install a security system so this doesn't happen again, okay? She nodded, feeling like she was operating in zombie mode, unable to shake the fear that this was all her fault and that the worst wasn't over yet. Chapter 10. Later that night, Gage gently lowered Maya into the portable crib the manager at the front desk had arranged for them. Brennan was already sound asleep, sprawled on his back with his arms over his head. Gage wished he could be that relaxed. They were safely settled in a nice 2-bedroom suite at the local extended stay hotel. That was a positive, as was the fact that after running a quick inventory of his house, It seemed like Kylie's computer was the only thing that had been taken. Gage should have felt happy that nothing important had been taken from him, but instead he felt restless, unsettled. He recognized the sensation as being ready to take action and not having a direction to focus his energy. In truth, the break-in at his house made no sense if it really was just a random criminal. He lived in a safe neighborhood. He didn't own a lot of flashy stuff that would entice thieves, and the few big-ticket items he did have, his new flat-screen TV, the video game console, his expensive tablet computer, hadn't been touched in the robbery. Only Kylie's laptop. She'd blamed herself for what had happened. But honestly, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was his fault. Every time he let his guard down, every time things seemed good, bad things happened to the people he cared about. His parents, his uncle, his teammates, Tucker and Christine. Now Kylie and the twins. Maybe if they hadn't gone to the nature preserve today, none of this would have happened. Perhaps if he'd gone to the park the other day instead of her, there would have been no mugging. If only. Gage sighed and rubbed his tired eyes. The sound of the shower cutting off in the ensuite bathroom brought him back to reality. The blame game served no purpose. His rational brain knew this, even if his heart didn't want to get with the program. There had to be a reason for someone to target his house, and the only way to protect the people who mattered to him was to find out who was behind the attack and why it had happened. The connection between the Japanese newspaper and the symbols painted on his living room walls might be a clue, but what could it mean? Kylie's time in Japan was the obvious connection, but he couldn't imagine that she had made any enemies. She was much more the peace, good vibes, and love type. But what else could be going on? Minutes of racking his brain produced no results, however. By the time the bathroom door creaked open and Kylie appeared, all pink-cheeked and freshly bathed, dressed in pink PJ pants and a white tank top, he was more frustrated than before, in more ways than one. She was beautiful and vulnerable, and he couldn't take his eyes off her. Sharing one of his favorite spots with her today had been magical. It felt like they'd finally knocked down the barriers between them and connected on a deeper level. That bond was still there, despite what had happened earlier, and he couldn't seem to stop himself from walking over to her and taking her hands, resting his forehead against hers, doing his best to be strong and confident for both of them. He knew she was scared. It was written all over her pretty face. He wanted to hold her and tell her everything would be all right, even if it was a lie. "Feel better?" he asked, taking a deep breath and catching the scent of soap from her skin. His nerve endings tingled, and his pulse kicked up a notch. Despite what had happened, he wanted her just as much as he had that afternoon. She nodded. "Yes. How are the twins?" "Asleep in the next room," he said, pulling away before he couldn't anymore. "If you're done, I'm going to hit the shower myself." He hoped the warm water would help him relax. After scrubbing down and rinsing off, though, Gage felt more on edge than ever. He slung his wet towel around his hips, brushed his teeth, and shaved, then walked out to grab sweats and a clean t-shirt from his duffel, only to find Kylie slumped on the edge of the bed. He stopped short, his skin feeling too tight for his body. "You okay?" he asked, the words emerging huskier than he'd intended. He did a quick sweep of the room, checking for threats. Everything was as it should be, except her. She shook her head and looked up at him, her eyes so filled with sorrow that his heart shattered. He was across the room and gathering her into his arms before he thought twice about his actions. "I'm sorry," she said, over and over again against his chest, her sobs scraping like sandpaper against his soul. Not sure what else to do, Gage held her close and rocked slowly back and forth, murmuring soft words of comfort against her hair. It seemed like this had been a long time coming for her, and he wanted her to get it all out. Lord knew there were plenty of times since the accident he'd felt like doing the same. After all she'd been through with losing her sister, discovering that someone else had custody of the kids, and 2 brushes with crime in as many days, it was no surprise that she'd hit her breaking point. Finally, she sniffled and pushed back slightly away from him. "I'm sorry," she repeated. He cupped her cheeks, brushing his thumbs over her damp cheeks. "First of all, please stop saying that. You have nothing to be sorry for. Secondly, I'm glad you got that out. It's not good to keep things bottled up inside." She gave a sad laugh. Says the man who represses everything. Gage winced. Touché. It was obvious that she was beginning to understand him. He should have seen that coming, given how open he'd found himself being with her. Still, they chuckled together, and it felt good. Along with the tears, it was cathartic. The moment seemed to pause then as they watched each other, the air between them thickening and unnamed tension building. Kylie pulled free at last, stepping back and running a hand over her damp hair. "I must look a mess." "No." Gage couldn't resist reaching out for her again and trailing the back of his fingers down her flushed cheek. "You always look gorgeous to me." "I do." Her blue eyes darkened and her pupils dilated. Her gaze flickered to his lips, then down to his bare chest. "You aren't so bad yourself." Twining his fingers with hers and bringing them to his lips, he said, "This is probably a very bad idea." She reached out to trace her hand from his collarbone, over his pec, down his abdomen to the top of the white towel around his waist. The feel of her gentle caress shot heat straight to his groin. Possibly the worst idea ever. Gage lifted her hand to his face and kissed her palm, ignoring the warning bells clanging inside his head. For this one night, for this one moment, he just wanted to forget. Forget his past. Forget the pressures of the future. Forget everything except this night, this woman. Up at the nature preserve, he'd more than suggested they make love that night, and she hadn't objected. Did a home break-in and the tears she'd shed change that? Not for him, and he didn't think for her either. He leaned in to nuzzle her neck, loving the way her head fell back to expose more of her velvet skin to him as he licked and nipped and kissed his way down her throat to her shoulder, nudging the strap of her tank top aside. "Does that mean you want me to stop?" Time seemed to slow as he waited for her answer. Kylie slid her fingers through his hair, bringing their faces together. She nibbled on his lower lip, making him shudder against her. "Never. I want you, Gage." She slowly backed toward the bed, drawing him with her. Chapter 11. The next morning, Kylie woke up, and it took her a minute to remember where she was. Then the memories of the night before rushed back, and her eyes widened as she stared at the ceiling. The other half of the bed was empty, and the bedroom door was closed, meaning Gage must have gotten up with the twins already. Hazy sunshine filtered through the gauzy curtains covering the windows, and she covered her eyes with her arm. She'd done it. The very thing she'd promised herself not to do. She'd slept with Gage, and not just slept with him. She'd fallen hard for him, had made love with him. Ugh, no matter how much she'd wanted him, still wanted him, she knew she wasn't the right woman for him. He deserved someone whole and complete, and able to give him a family of his own. Not her. Now she'd complicated everything for both of them. With a sigh, she tossed back the covers and hurried naked across to the bathroom. A quick shower did little to remove the guilt she felt. As she brushed her teeth and pulled her wet hair back into a slick ponytail at the nape of her neck, she did her best to figure out where to go from here. She needed something to keep her occupied. But without her laptop, she couldn't contact clients, couldn't find work. Heck, she didn't even have a driver's license or a credit card. She was a mess. The only thing she had left in her life was the twins. The twins. What had she been thinking when she decided to fight Gage for custody and adopt them herself? She wasn't a fit mother. Christine and Tucker had been right to give them to Gage. He was strong and smart and reliable and responsible. The only thing she'd done since coming home from Japan was cause trouble. Clearly, she was not the kind of person to raise kids. Not at all. "I'm sorry, sis. So sorry." Kylie pulled on clean jeans and a t-shirt, then sat down on the bed to put on her socks and sneakers. Well, today that stopped. No more being a victim. Starting today, she'd take responsibility for herself and her actions. She'd find a place of her own. Contact the police and see if they'd located her missing computer. If they did, great. If not, she'd get a new one and start fresh. Luckily, she saved her contacts in the cloud so she could transfer them over from her phone. Speaking of her phone, the thing was vibrating like crazy on the nightstand, and her hopes soared. Maybe it was the police. Maybe they'd found her computer or the diaper bag with her wallet. Maybe things were looking up after all. Except as she unlocked the device and stared down at the missed calls listed on her screen. They were all from the same number. The police station, maybe? She searched through the clothes she'd stuffed into her bag the night before for the card Detective Carlisle had given her. But nope, didn't match that number. Weird. But maybe it was another officer in the department. The other cops at Gage's house last night had mentioned they'd have a team of investigators working on the case. Perhaps it was one of them. She hit redial and waited, listening to make sure Gage hadn't come back in. He had enough on his hands with the twins and getting the repairs made at his house today. He didn't need to be worrying about her, too. She could take care of herself. She'd been doing it a long time now. Once she got some things straightened out, she'd be fine. "I wondered when you'd call back," an unfamiliar male voice said through the phone line, and her heart stumbled. No hello, no warmth in the tone at all. "I've got your computer." Crap, 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 crap. Her first instinct was to call Gage in here and let him know what was going on. But she couldn't do that. This was her mess to clean up, and she refused to bring any more danger to his doorstep. The best thing to do would be to try and get as much information from the thief as possible, then relay it to the cops. Let them handle it. "Who is this?" she demanded. The man on the other end of the call chuckled as if she'd said something funny or stupid. Probably both to him. Why would he give her a name? "I want my laptop back," she said, praying her voice sounded steady even as her knees shook. "Today." "Not yet. I want something from you first." Money? Had to be. She'd read the news stories about those internet hackers who took possession of people's files and didn't give them back unless they paid a ransom. Stealing the laptop itself must be a new variation on that. She didn't have a huge amount in savings, but enough to keep her comfortable for a while. "How much?" This time the laugh was sinister. "You couldn't pay me enough. We need to discuss some things. Meet me at the diner on Park Grenada. Call me when you're there." Discuss things? Okay, not some file ransom scheme then. Her mind raced, and the panic inside her rose to a boiling point. What was happening? She'd seen enough true crime shows to know the last thing you should do was allow the criminals to isolate you or move you to another location. But her whole life was on that laptop, and it wasn't like he was asking her to meet him in an alley or something. This would be at a public restaurant, hopefully with lots of people around. She'd be safe. As soon as she got her stuff back, she'd call the cops and tell them everything. She'd tell Gage everything, too, but she couldn't tell him now. He'd want to come with her, to keep her safe, and that would mean they'd have to bring the babies, too. She was not about to put the twins in a dangerous situation again. No, they'd stay here, with Gage. He was the one they belonged with. He'd keep them safe. "Okay, I'll be there." The line went dead. She blinked at the wall across from her, pulse pounding loud in her ears. Through the bedroom door, she could hear the squeaks of the babies and Gage's silly voice as he played with them, and her chest squeezed with fear and tenderness. Last night had been amazing, even if it had been a mistake. Gage had been so loving and giving that it had brought tears to her eyes. Now she just agreed to meet whoever had broken into his house the night before, alone. It was insane, it was wrong. But it was necessary just the same because she didn't want to cause any more disruption in Gage and the twins' lives than she already had. Squaring her shoulders, Kylie shoved her phone in her back pocket, grabbed a jacket, and headed out into the brightly lit main room of their suite. Gage was sitting on the sofa, a baby in each arm and a bottle in each hand, looking like her every dream come to life. This was what she wanted for herself, had always wanted. A man to love and children of her own. This moment was as close as she was ever going to get to that. She wanted to savor it, enjoy it. But she didn't have time. Besides, there was no point in clinging to something she knew she couldn't keep. "Morning, I need to run over to the drugstore across the way. Do you need anything? Baby supplies? Snacks?" The lies tasted bitter on her tongue, but she said them anyway because she had no choice. She forced a smile she didn't quite feel and leaned down to kiss him on the cheek before smooching both of the babies. She drew in their scents, knowing that they'd never be hers. "No, we're good," he said, standing. He was studying her, and she tried so hard to look normal. "Everything okay?" "Fine." The concern in his eyes had her turning around to face the sink so he wouldn't see the fear in hers. She wasn't an actress, not even a second-rate one. If she wasn't careful, he was going to see right through her facade. She'd taken plenty of self-defense courses in her day. A woman didn't work internationally without knowing how to take care of herself. She could get herself out of a tight scrape if needed, but the way Gage threatened her heart could be the death of her yet. Then he came up behind her and leaned in to kiss the side of her neck, and she nearly melted into a puddle of goo at his feet. "You sure?" he whispered near her ear, making her shiver. Last night was incredible. Kylie hung her head and squeezed her eyes shut. He was correct. Last night had been mind-blowing, but today harsh reality had returned. A reality she needed to face on her own. "Yes, I'm good. It's all good." She turned fast and collided with his bare, warm chest. She looked up into his curious gaze and couldn't stop herself from kissing him long and deep. By the time she pulled away, they were both breathless and the twins were getting restless in his arms. "I won't be long, I promise." "Sure you don't want me to give you a ride? If you wait a minute, I'll get dressed and—" "No, it's fine. The fresh air will do me good, and anyway, it won't take more than a minute. See you soon." She took off out the door before he could say another word, leaving him staring after her. It was barely 9 a.m. according to the clock in the hall on a Saturday, so the hotel's lobby was packed with people taking advantage of the free continental breakfast bar. She managed to weave her way through the throng and slip out the automated front doors without a problem, being sure to pass right beneath the security camera mounted above the exit in case the police needed to track her time of departure later. The drugstore was across the parking lot and down the street about a quarter-mile from the hotel. The 24-hour diner was just on the other side of it. The sun was out, but this early the air was still a bit chilled. Kylie hunkered down inside her jacket and walked fast toward her destination, checking her phone a couple of times along the way to make sure her mystery thief hadn't called back. Nothing. When she reached the diner, she was glad to see the parking lot full of cars. More people meant more protection, hopefully. She took out her phone and hit redial. "I'm here," she said when the thief picked up. "Where are you?" "Around back, near the dumpsters," the man said. "You better be alone. I'll know if you're not, and you won't like my punishment." Crap. She took a couple of deep breaths. Not ideal. Okay, bad. Very bad. Looked like she was meeting him in an alley after all. An image of Gage flashed in her mind again. So strong, so competent, and she almost called him, but stopped herself in the end. No. She could handle this. This was her problem. Besides, if he came, he'd have to bring the babies with them. She wasn't going to be responsible for putting them in harm's way. Kylie exhaled slowly, then made her way down the side of the brick building, nodding to several patrons who passed her by on their way from their cars to the restaurant entrance. There must be a parking lot behind the building. Okay, that made her feel better. She wasn't entirely alone here. People were close by. If there was danger, all she had to do was yell and they'd... She rounded the corner and spotted a tall, strongly built man leaning up against the dumpster. He straightened when he saw her, and her stomach nosedived to her toes as her mind whirled. Whoa, wait a sec. She knew this guy, or at least she recognized him. He'd worked as a bodyguard for the husband of her client in Tokyo. But what was he doing here in California? And why would he take her laptop? The man snapped his fingers and pointed to a spot in front of him. She bristled at being beckoned like a dog, but went anyway, given the thug had a good 150 pounds of solid muscle on her. "What do you want?" she asked, beyond caring that her voice was shaking at this point. "Who are you?" "Who I am doesn't matter. I'm here on behalf of my boss and your former employer, Mr. Hirohito." With each word, he took a step closer to her, steering her away from her escape route and toward the brick wall of the restaurant. This was not going according to her plan at all. Think, Kylie. Think. "Why would Mr. Hirohito send you here?" she asked, scanning the area as best she could. A large dumpster blocked one side and obscured them from view. On the other side was the thief. No, not thief. Bodyguard. Crap. "What's going on here? I don't understand." "Where's the footage?" he snarled close to her face. "What footage? I don't know what you're talking about." Her mind raced through her time in the Hirohito household. Mrs. Hirohito had seemed nice enough, if a little bit ditzy. She'd gone along with all of Kylie's plans, and cost hadn't been an issue. The one time Kylie had met the husband, he'd seemed a bit off. Not in a weird way, in a he's hiding something way. At the time, Kylie had brushed it aside as a difference in culture, but now, was Mr. Hirohito involved in criminal activities? They were rich beyond belief, and the details had been sketchy as to exactly how he'd made his billions. Not that it was any of her business. Normally, Kylie gave her clients as much privacy as possible. It was a necessity in her line of business, with a clientele that insisted on discretion. But perhaps she needed to dig a bit deeper here, especially if it would keep her alive until she could find a way to get help. "Where is it?" the bodyguard demanded as he loomed over her. "You'll have to explain." She was buying time to think and hoping to get something out of the brute. "What's Mr. Hirohito involved in?" "You know what he's involved in. You caught it all on camera, didn't you? Said you were taking pictures for your work, but you were there spying on him." He glared at her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Are you with the feds?" The rough brick felt cold against her palms, and she scrabbled for the right answer. This guy thought she'd captured footage of some kind of illegal activity on her phone in Tokyo. With her sister's death and things with Gage and the twins, she'd not had time to go back through and delete any of the photos or videos she'd taken while in Japan. That would hopefully turn out to be good evidence for the feds if she got out of this alive. Crap, 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 bluff. She needed to bluff until she could come up with an escape plan. "Yes, I am with a federal agency, and my backup is on the way. Unless you want to spend the rest of your life in prison, you better let me go and return that laptop. It's federal property." The thug narrowed his gaze on her, as if considering his options. Then a siren sounded in the distance, and he cursed under his breath. "Tell me where that footage is, or you'll regret it." She had a list of regrets, but she had to keep going with this part she was playing. "If you turn yourself in now, they might give you a lighter sentence." She managed to get out before his hand clamped tight around her neck, pinning her to the wall. From the corner of her eye, she saw a metallic flash, and her already rapid pulse skyrocketed. Her mind whirled, and flashes of scenes from all those stupid cop shows she liked to watch at night filled her head. "You don't want to do that. The murder of a federal officer means life in prison without parole," she gasped as his fingers tightened. She pulled her threat out of nowhere in her adrenaline-fueled terror. "Let me go." He chuckled, a sinister sound. "Mr. Hirohito sent me to take care of this, and I will, one way or another. I always get the job done." Chapter 12. Gage had felt uneasy since Kylie left, but he'd tried to push the feeling away, telling himself he was overreacting. But now she'd been gone for nearly an hour, and he was starting to get worried. He hadn't argued much when she'd left because he'd thought she wanted a little time to herself to process how things had changed between the two of them. But this seemed like much more than morning after awkwardness. Last night had been pretty amazing, truth be told. And it had felt like it could be the start of something even better. Since he'd taken custody of the twins, it had been all he could do to get through one day at a time. But now he was starting to look to the future, and he was realizing that he wanted Kylie to be a part of it, for the twins and for himself. There was no one better than the kid's aunt to be with them, and he cared for her. He wasn't in love with Kylie. Not yet. They hadn't known each other long enough for that. But there was a definite something there, a sense that given time and deeper connection, he could fall for her in the future. She'd mentioned sticking around for a while to be near the twins, and he wondered if he might be included in that scenario now, too. He'd really like to get the opportunity to get to know her better. She was kooky and funny and out there in a way he'd never allowed himself to be before and after spending time with her in nature, absorbing all that energy she always talked about. He could kind of see it. Didn't necessarily understand it, but he could see it. It could be good between them, really good, given time, and if he hadn't scared her off to the point where she decided to just walk away completely. But she wouldn't do that. Would she? No, he was sure she wouldn't. No matter how awkward things might get between the two of them, she wouldn't just leave the twins behind if she had any choice in the matter. So what if she didn't have a choice? What if she was right about those recent crimes being connected? And what if the criminal had somehow found her? He tried to tell himself that he was jumping to conclusions, assuming the worst-case scenario. But the more time that went by without Kylie's return, the more anxious he felt. A half-hour later, he got the twins down for a morning nap, which gave him a few minutes to himself. He checked his phone first to see if Kylie had called. Maybe she'd had to go to another store to get what she wanted. Surely, if she'd had some kind of problem, she'd have gotten a hold of him, right? Except there were no missed calls or texts, no messages from her at all. He checked his watch again, then poured himself another cup of coffee. Extra caffeine wouldn't help tone down the adrenaline starting to surge through his system, but he needed something to keep himself occupied or the worry would get to him. The more he paced the living room of their suite, the more his mind churned out all the doubt demons residing there. By the time another 20 minutes had passed, Gage had finished his coffee and moved beyond restless into straight-up worried mode. Something wasn't right. He was sure of that now, and he hated doing nothing to try to fix whatever was wrong. Waiting sucked, and he was bad at it. He checked his phone again, and then tried calling hers. No answer. The knots between his shoulder blades tightened. He wanted to run over to the drugstore now and check on her, but he couldn't because of the twins. After the mugging, then the break-in, he didn't want to call the police either. The last thing he needed right now was to get a reputation as the SEAL who cried wolf. He went back into the bedroom they'd shared just to double-check. Her bag was still there, her stuff still in the bathroom, so she hadn't bailed on him. Finally, he couldn't take it any longer and called Detective Carlisle, not caring about his reputation. "Hey, it's Gage Winters," he said, doing his best to keep the growing sense of urgency inside him from exploding into panic. "I've got a problem, and I'm hoping you can help me with it. In an unofficial capacity, of course." He knew the police couldn't do anything formally since she technically didn't qualify as a missing person, not for another 22 hours. He'd be insane with worry by then. "Sure. What do you need?" Carlisle asked, and Gage sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for friends he could count on. "It's Kylie. She went shopping a couple hours ago, and I can't get a hold of her," he said. "She should have been back here by now, and I wondered if you could check on her. I'd do it myself, but I've got the twins. I know it's an imposition, and my concern is probably way off base, but I'd really appreciate it. And maybe you're not off base after all." Carlisle sighed. "Listen, I was going to wait to tell you until I had more information, but we ran a couple prints we found after the break-in at your house. We got a hit this morning off EAFIS. The international database?" Gage's instincts went haywire while his analytical brain kicked into overdrive. "What did you find?" "Seems the guy who broke into your house matched some thug who's been tied to the Yakuza." "You've got to be kidding me." Gage ran a hand through his hair and moved to the farthest corner of the living room away from the twins' room to avoid waking them. He knew who the Yakuza were and what they were capable of. "What is happening here?" "Not sure yet, buddy. Hang on." Carlisle put him on hold, then came back on the line. "I just finished talking to Robinson, the officer who took the report from Kylie the day of the park mugging. He managed to get a usable print off the newspaper they found, and it matches the ones from your house. The Japanese mafia was after Kylie?" Gage took a deep breath to calm his raging pulse and concentrated on the facts he had. Kylie said she was working for a wealthy client in Tokyo before she rushed home to see the twins after the accident. "Mr. Hirohito," she said the guy's name was. "I don't know anything else about him. Okay, I'll get some of my guys here at the station to check him out. In the meantime, tell me where Kylie went, and I'll send over some uniformed officers to her location. Where are you? Gage gave him the address of the drugstore. What about the twins? I can't leave them alone. We'll keep them safe, don't worry. I'm on my way. Sit tight and don't do anything on your own. Gage hung up, feeling like he was in a daze. He'd gone from worrying about whether he and Kylie had a future together to whether she'd have a future at all. He slumped down on the sofa and stared at the wall across from him. Yakuza. He'd never dealt with them before, but he'd dealt with their kind in the military. Guys who thought they operated above the law, who thought might meant right. If Kylie had fallen victim to one of those men. He rested his head back against the cushions and closed his eyes, forcing himself to forget the what-ifs. They weren't helpful in this scenario. He was a strategist. He needed to think logically in order to solve this puzzle. There was a gangster after Kylie. But why? It had to be related to the client she'd had in Tokyo somehow. Ben had said the police would run Mr. Hirohito's name, but he didn't have the time or patience to wait for that. He pulled up the browser on his phone and typed in the name. Unfortunately, Hirohito was a fairly common name in Japan. Next, he added wealthy, and that narrowed it down some. Then, on a hunch, he typed in scandal, and up popped what he was looking for. He scanned through the newspaper article. If this really was Kylie's client, then he was being investigated for international securities fraud and money laundering. Gage studied the pictures. Hirohito's wife was way younger than him, which matched with what Kylie had told him about her. She'd also said the wife had hired her and the husband had just gone along with it, so it was possible the wife wasn't involved in the criminal activity. Okay, so a wealthy client, involved in corrupt activities. It was possible Hirohito had dealings with the Yakuza. Heck, maybe he was even some kind of big shot in their organization. Stuff like that happened all the time in America. Lawyers and businessmen with ties to the mafia. But it still didn't explain why they were after Kylie. She'd not said anything about finding or seeing something suspicious while working there. How could an interior decorator be a target of this man? Gage berated himself again. Why hadn't they talked more, shared more? This was always his MO. Not getting it until it was too late. That's what had cost the lives of his teammates back in Afghanistan. That's what scared him the most about raising the twins. Missing something important with their development or their health until it was too late. It was what was driving him crazy about Kylie now. If anything happened to her because of his stupid fears, insecurities, and trust issues, he'd never forgive himself. Never. It seemed like a small eternity before a knock sounded on the door, and he let Carlisle in. He'd never been so glad to see the guy in his life. There was a female officer with him as well. She introduced herself as Cora Mertz. Carlisle pulled him aside. I brought her along because she's great with kids. She's got 2 of her own at home. She'll stay here with the twins while you and I go after Kylie, okay? Okay. Gage had reservations about leaving the babies with someone he hadn't fully vetted personally, but there was no choice now. He'd have to trust Carlisle's judgment. He watched while Cora went into the room where the twins were fussing now that they'd woken up and was stunned to see her quiet them down with ease. Soon she was bouncing a baby in each arm, and they were happy as clams. He was forced to rethink his feelings once again. Right, let me get my shoes and a jacket and we can go. Kylie said she was heading to the drugstore near here. It's maybe half a mile walk. Gage pulled on socks and sneakers, then grabbed his windbreaker and headed back out to the living room. After kissing each twin's head and showing Cora where everything was, he left the suite with Carlisle, and they boarded the elevator to the lobby. As they rode down, he noticed the security camera in the ceiling, and an idea occurred. The hotel should have footage of Kylie when she left. Way ahead of you. Carlisle gave him a curt nod and stepped closer to the back wall when they stopped on the next floor down to let on more people. He leaned closer to Gage and said, I stopped at the front desk on my way up here and requested the footage. The manager didn't blink an eye or ask for a subpoena. I'm guessing this isn't their first rodeo. Gage wasn't sure if he should be happy about that or alarmed. Part of him wanted to run right back upstairs and grab the twins and get out of there. But then he remembered Cora and her sidearm and her vow to protect the twins no matter what, and he refocused again on Kylie. She was out there without protection, and she might be dealing with Japanese gang members and who knew what else. She needed him, and he intended to be there for her. They exited the elevator and walked over to the front desk where the manager waved them back into the office. He replayed the security tapes from a few hours earlier, and they clearly showed Kylie cutting through the lobby, then walking outside and across the parking lot. Alone. The footage cut off as she walked out of the frame. So, somewhere between the hotel and the drugstore, most likely their mystery thief had confronted her. He clenched his fists at his sides to keep from punching something. If that jerk so much as hurt one hair on her head, he'd go ballistic. They were at the hotel entrance when Carlisle's phone rang. "You got it?" he asked as he answered the call. He listened for a few seconds. "Thanks." He hung up and turned to Gage. "We've triangulated Kylie's cell signal. We've got a lock on her location. It's not far. Come on, let's find your Kylie." Gage jogged after Carlisle as the police detective headed down the street. She wasn't his Kylie yet, but with luck, one day maybe she would be. But first he had to find her. Chapter 13. Think. Come on. Think. Kylie squeezed her eyes shut and forced herself to concentrate. Mr. Hirohito was a smart guy. There must be a reason behind his fear. Something more than just paranoia. She must have caught something very incriminating without even realizing it. She quickly ran through her time in the Tokyo house, searching for anything suspicious that might have been interpreted as her spying on him. To be honest, she'd only seen him a couple of times while she'd been working. She worked mostly with Mrs. Hirohito, but there had been that one day. She'd been arranging the Zen garden outside. The house had floor-to-ceiling windows in several rooms, including the office. She'd had her laptop sitting on one of the benches while she worked so she could refer back to the design she'd planned. During a break, she'd noticed Mr. Hirohito was having a meeting. The person with him had been tall, dark, vaguely familiar. Focusing on that memory, she tried to concentrate on that face. Where had she seen it before? It was just out of her mind's reach, and then suddenly it came to her in a rush of adrenaline. He was that banker that she'd seen on the news recently, the one who was copping a plea deal on a big-time embezzlement case. Her stomach sank to her toes. If Mr. Hirohito had been involved in that somehow, then he'd want to eliminate any witnesses or evidence linking him to the banker. He must have seen her taking photos of the landscaping and assumed she'd been taping him. When she'd quit the job so suddenly and headed back to the U.S., it had probably confirmed his fears that she was spying. "Get me into your computer so I can destroy the files," the thug growled closer to her face. She thought about complying, handing over her password and letting him see that she didn't have anything incriminating on his boss after all. Except she might. She might have accidentally caught something that day, and if she did, then what? It hardly seemed likely he'd just let her go at this point. No, the laptop and its files were the only leverage she had. She couldn't throw that away. Playing along, at least a little longer, seemed her only option. Perhaps if she could somehow get him to let her use the laptop, she could get a message to Gage somehow. "I can give you my password, but it won't get you to the files," she said, trying to sound confident. She actually did have a second password to access her files. She added that extra layer of protection thanks to advice from a former client who worked in cybersecurity. Her assailant snarled and brought the tip of the knife close to her cheek again. "And my agency would have changed that second password since I had to report the laptop stolen. I swear that's true. I mean, I could try logging in myself to get access." "Nice try." The guy snorted. "You think I'm stupid? You ain't touching that computer." Okay, she needed a different tactic. "If they've changed the passwords, I'll need to get into my account at the agency to get the new ones. It'll be done through a series of codes that verify that I am who I say I am." She swallowed hard, her throat dry and scratchy. "I'm the only one who can do that." He shook his head and loosened his hold on her throat, but only to grab her by the nape and shove her forward, toward a car parked on the other side of the dumpster. "Move!" Terrified, Kylie dug in her heels. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you." Her chance of survival sharply declined if she got in a car with him. That was on all of the true crime shows. "You want to type? The laptop's in the car." He wrenched her arm to get her to move forward before forcing her to her knees on the pavement next to the rear door of the black sedan. Unfortunately, because of the dumpster and the building, they weren't any more visible to most people than they'd been before. The thug kept the knife near her face with one hand while he opened the car door with the other and grabbed her computer from the back seat. It landed on the ground near her knees with a resounding thwack. Thank goodness she'd gotten the warranty with it because that sounded screen-crackingly loud. "Type! Now!" Fingers shaking, she managed to get the laptop open and was surprised to find not only was the screen not broken, the battery still had half a charge. The password box showed in the middle of the screen, the cursor blinking at her as if mocking her. The thug was standing over her, the knife held against her cheek. She felt the sharp tip dig in. "Type!" Okay. She needed more time, but there wasn't any. All the flaws in her plan were becoming clear, such as the fact that she had no idea how to send a message to Gage. She wasn't connected to any network out here in the alley. Once she logged in, she wouldn't be able to access anything other than her locally stored files. And once this man had access to that data, he'd kill her. She'd never see Gage again, never see the twins again, never get to spend time with them as they grew up, never get to spend more time with Gage either, never get to see if the chemistry between them could grow into something more, something lasting, something strong and true and real. Tears stung her eyes, and she didn't even try to hold them back. They ran down her cheeks and dripped onto the laptop as her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Type in the password, or I swear I'll—" "Police! Step away from her. Put your weapon down and your hands up, slowly." The air filled with the sound of guns being cocked, and Kylie had never heard a more blessed sound in her life. At least until another voice joined the fray. "Kylie?" She looked up to see Gage and Detective Carlisle move in near the uniformed officers. Carlisle had his gun trained on the thug holding her hostage, but her attention was entirely focused on Gage. Everything she wanted to say to him rushed through her head, but she was utterly speechless. "Drop the knife and no one gets hurt," Carlisle warned, edging closer. "Make the smart choice, man. We both know you won't get out of this." Everyone froze. She held Gage's eyes, seeing the fear there, seeing his body tense as if to spring into action. He didn't appear to have a weapon on him, but he had strength and skills, and she knew, just knew, that he'd sacrifice himself if that was what it took to save her. "Please don't let it come to that," she silently pleaded. Gage locked his gaze on the man who held the knife just as she felt him shift above her. The thug's hand sank into her hair and jerked her head upward, exposing her neck to the blade again. For one terrifying second, she was sure he would slit her throat, but then she was knocked to the side and went flat onto the pavement. The crash of two bodies hitting sounded above her, and the knife clattered to the ground 3 feet away. The next thing she knew, the thug was flat on his back with Gage on top of him, pummeling him. Gage got in several solid hits to her assailant's face before Detective Carlisle hauled him off. "We've got him. Stand down, Winters," the detective ordered. Gage shook free and reached for Kylie. His arms went around her, holding her to him. Nothing else mattered aside from being in his arms. She was safe, at last. A wave of emotions crashed into her, and she sobbed against his chest as the fear left her. She was only vaguely aware of Carlisle slapping cuffs on the thug, and a squad car arrived shortly thereafter, lights and sirens blazing. Officers were talking, but none of that mattered. "You're okay," Gage whispered over and over to her. "I've got you." "The kids?" she asked when her terror finally edged away and her senses returned. "Safe with a police officer in the hotel room. We'll be with them soon," he assured her. That was all she wanted. Him and the twins, her family. Together they would be the family she chose, like Gage had suggested when they were up at the nature preserve. She wanted to say that to him, to tell him how much he'd come to mean to her, how much she was looking forward to knowing him even better, how maybe they could have a future together. This wasn't the time or the place, but that talk would happen today, just as soon as this nightmare was truly over. She promised herself that as she clung to him. Gage waited impatiently in the hotel room for Kylie to come back. They'd both been taken to the station to be interviewed, but he'd been released quickly so he could return and care for the twins. He'd played with them to wear them out and to keep himself distracted while he awaited her return. Because if he stopped moving, even for a few seconds, the image of Kylie on the ground with a knife to her throat came back into his head. He'd been in tough situations plenty of times as a SEAL, had been scared before, even terrified. But those experiences were nothing compared to what had gone through him in those seconds. Nothing. He'd almost lost her, just when he was coming to understand how much she meant to him. "Aunt Kylie'll be back soon," he told Brennan and Maya when he put them into the portable crib that evening. After dinner, he bathed them and gave them some cuddle time. That was coming to be his favorite part of the day. Now they were so sleepy that their eyes were already closed. "She'll give you kisses then." Maya opened her eyes for a second, almost as if she understood, before drifting off to sleep. He made sure they were out before going back into the living room of their suite. Carlisle had texted while the kids were in the tub that he'd be dropping Kylie off soon. Gage took a moment to straighten up the space and call for room service, trying to guess what she might like best from the menu. There wasn't a ton to choose from. The hotel was a decent one, but it wasn't 5-star. He'd like to have given her that, to spoil her after the day she'd had. 5 minutes after their dinner arrived, he heard a knock on the door and rushed to it. Kylie was there, along with Carlisle. "Thought I'd walk her up," the detective said. "Everything good?" "It is," Gage said. "Thanks for everything." "You're welcome. Let's get together soon." Carlisle turned to Kylie. "I want to tell you again how brave you are. You already said that at the station. It's worth repeating. Take care." Carlisle headed back toward the elevator as Gage pulled Kylie into the room and his embrace. "Hi," she said a moment later when she pulled back from him. "Are the kids good?" "They're fine, already asleep. I did promise them that you'd give them goodnight kisses." He knew they wouldn't know or remember, but still, it was important to keep the promise. "I'll do that right now, but also, do I smell food?" She sniffed the air. "I'm starved. Getting kidnapped is hungry work." Her tone was light, but he could see the fatigue in her face. At least that was better than the fear that had been there earlier. "I'll be right back." While she was saying goodnight to the twins, he uncovered their meals and carried them to the coffee table so they could sit on the couch. He figured that she could use somewhere comfortable to unwind. "Thanks," she said when she returned. "This is nice. Just what I need." While they ate, he told her about how Brennan had army crawled the length of the room while Maya had tried to pull herself to standing, using an ottoman to steady her. She hadn't quite been successful, but he expected that she'd perfect her new skill soon enough. "Wish I'd seen that," Kylie commented as she pushed away the remains of her meal. She slumped back against the couch cushions. "What a day, huh? I guess I should say. What a month." Her voice was rough with exhaustion and the crying earlier. First the accident, then rushing home, then the mugging and the break-in, then this. "I'll take a quiet weekend at home any time now." "Me too." He glanced over to the door of the second bedroom where the twins were sleeping. Not a peep had come out of there, which was good because he and Kylie had things they needed to discuss privately, no matter how tired she looked and he felt. Things he wasn't willing to put off even until the next day. He just had to find the right place to start. "Listen, about you finding your own place. There's no rush at all. I've got plenty of room at the house, and I can clear out the den and make it into a third bedroom if you want. I never use it anyway, so it's fine. That way you'll be close to the kids." "And me," he added silently. "I don't want to be any more trouble," she said, rubbing her eyes. "It's bad enough I brought all this to your doorstep. That'll teach me to take all those pictures, huh? Hey, stop blaming yourself. There's no way you could have known Hirohito was some whack-job gangster or that he'd send that goon after you. It wasn't your fault." He sighed and scrubbed a hand over his face. "If anything, I should have seen this coming. I was a freaking strategist in the SEALs. Staying one step ahead of everyone else was my job. He was also a protector, but he'd nearly failed at that. The blame game goes both ways, you know. She nudged him with her stockinged foot. Maybe we should compromise and say neither of us are at fault here. And I appreciate your offer, but I should really get a place of my own, figure some stuff out, get my life back on track again. Unable to resist, he reached down and placed his hand over her foot, massaging the arch gently with his thumb. Does that life include fighting me for custody of the twins? He had to ask that before he could move the conversation to what he really wanted to discuss. She watched him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and his heart sank. He didn't want to do this again, be at odds with her. He wanted them to be like they were the day before, connected, working together, harmonious. Finally, she sighed and said, "No, what happened today made me realize I'm not ready to raise the twins on my own. They're better off with you." I don't know about that. He resumed massaging her foot. I was thinking, what about if we raised them together? Kylie straightened and narrowed her gaze on him. Please don't tell me you're proposing. I don't think I can take any more drama today. Gage laughed. Not marriage. We don't know each other that well. Yet. Exactly. She relaxed against the cushions again. But I think the twins would benefit from having both of us around. He rubbed her ankle, and she gave a small moan he felt straight to his groin. Plus, I could use an extra set of hands to help me. Babe, the hands you've got are pretty spectacular all on their own. She smiled at him, then sighed. But I wouldn't mind being around the twins more. His chest squeezed when she didn't say anything about wanting to spend more time with him. Right. Yep, that's exactly why he steered clear of all this emotional crap. It only led to disappointment and heartache. He frowned down at her foot and gently rolled each of her toes between his fingers. Her soft laugh lilted through the air as she removed her foot from his grasp and scooted closer to him. Wouldn't mind being around you more either. His pulse stumbled, stopped, kicked into high gear, and he glanced sideways at her. Yeah? Oh yeah. Next thing he knew, she was on his lap and kissing him like there was no tomorrow. By the time she pulled away slightly, they were both breathless. I was so scared earlier. I thought I might never see the twins again. Never get to tell you how much I like you. How much I enjoyed our night together. He held her close, tucking her head beneath his chin as he rubbed her back. I was scared too. It felt like what happened with my teammates all over again. I couldn't lose you too. I had to find you. I wasn't sure what direction my life was heading in until you showed up, and now I can't imagine my world without you in it. Even if it's only as a friend. I'd say we're a bit more than friends, she said against his chest. Her breath warm through the soft cotton of his t-shirt. I'd like us to be a lot more than friends. Me too, he whispered into her hair, savoring her sweet patchouli scent. Please say you'll stay. We can get to know each other better, raise the twins. You can redecorate my place again and fix my chi. Kylie sat up slightly and kissed him sweetly. Fix your chi. There's nothing wrong with your chi, honey. Best chi ever. And raising the twins will take longer than a few weeks. We're talking months, years, decades. I'm game if you are. Gage grinned this time, feeling like a huge burden had been lifted off him. He wasn't alone anymore. He didn't have to go through this alone. He had Kylie now. Will you stay? She smiled and snuggled back into him. I will, for as long as you'll have me. Chapter 14. 1 year later. Hey, sweetheart, can you grab that plate of burgers from the fridge for me? Gage called from the backyard of his house. I don't want to leave the grill unattended with the twins outside. Sure thing, babe, Kylie yelled back through the open kitchen window. It was late autumn in Southern California, and though it wasn't much different weather-wise than any other time of the year, the nights did get a bit cooler now. Still plenty warm enough to enjoy being outside. Things had settled into a nice routine these days. He adjusted the burners on the gas grill, then squinted across the yard to where the twins were playing in the sandbox he'd built for them. They were running everywhere now and getting into everything. He and Kylie had baby-proofed the house as best they could, but somehow the twins still found plenty of places to get into. That was life with toddlers, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The same was true for the woman in his life. She'd stayed on living at his house, and they'd gotten to know each other better. A whole lot better, in fact. Who was he kidding? He was head over heels in love with her now and hoped she felt the same way about him. They were so crazy about each other that they talked increasingly about making it official. While he hadn't actually proposed, they'd talked around the idea enough that they both knew how it would go. The plan was to get married at City Hall with Ben Carlisle as Gage's best man and the gal Kylie had hired as her assistant in her feng shui business as her maid of honor. Soon, the moment would feel right. He'd ask her officially, and then they'd do it. Probably before Gage started working for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. He'd been in training for 4 months at the academy and would graduate in December. Carlisle had promised to set him on the path for a detective job. With the skills Gage had from the SEALs, he thought it would suit him well. At the moment, Kylie was the true breadwinner. She'd picked up a bunch of new celebrity clients in LA after the Hirohito trial had hit the tabloids. It seemed movie stars couldn't get enough of scandal and intrigue and having their energies adjusted. He still wasn't a huge believer in all her mystical ideas, but he was a firm believer in her, and if her work made her happy, then he supported her 100%. "Here you go," she said, coming down the steps of their deck with a plate of raw meat in her hand. "I'll take mine well done, thanks." "Burned to a crisp coming up," he said, laughing when she stuck her tongue out at him. "Pardon me if I don't want food poisoning." She gave him a mock haughty look as she put the plate down by the grill. "Is that a hit against my cooking?" He narrowed his gaze on her but wound his arm around her waist. The skirt she wore swished around his legs. "Nah." She gripped his t-shirt and pulled him closer for a soft kiss. "You know I love you." "Do I?" he asked, but didn't give her time to answer as he kissed her again. More deeply this time. "Yeah, I guess I do." Those words were whispered against her lips. The sound of her ringing cell phone broke them apart. Kylie pulled the phone from her pocket and glanced at the screen, then up at him, her eyes wide. "It's Dr. Bailey's office." His heart stumbled. "Answer it." She nodded and turned away slightly to talk. He knew he shouldn't eavesdrop, but he hung on every word she said. She'd gone in for her regular checkup a week ago and had made a point of speaking to her doctor about the fact that she had been late on her period. They'd both been praying it wasn't anything serious and that her endometriosis hadn't worsened. He'd spent the past week feeling worried and helpless. "Yes, Dr. Bailey. No, I understand. Okay, thank you." Kylie hung up and stood with her back to him for what seemed a small eternity. Her shoulders rose as she heaved in a breath. Did that mean the news was bad? Finally, Gage couldn't take it anymore. "Sweetheart, what did she say?" "Well, unfortunately," Kylie turned around to face him, her gaze downcast. "We're going to have to adjust our plans a little." "Oh, sweetheart," he said. "I'm so sorry, but don't worry. Whatever treatment or procedure you need, we'll get through it together. I just want you healthy and happy." Then she looked up at him, her face pale and her hands shaking. "No, there's no procedure or treatment for this." Hard in his throat. Gage led her over to the bench of the picnic table and sat her down before taking a seat beside her. He took a swift glance toward the kids, who were still happily playing in the sandbox. That was good because he had to focus on Kylie. His emotions were rioting inside him. He couldn't lose her. Not now. Not when he loved her more than life itself. After she'd moved in with him permanently, he'd made it his top priority to learn everything he could about her disease so he could be there for her and support her. He'd never heard of endometriosis being lethal, but maybe there was something he'd missed. "Whatever's wrong, we'll get a second opinion. We'll go anywhere, do anything. I love you, Kylie, and I want to fight this." He took her icy hand and warmed it between his. He'd lost too many people he cared about in his life. Gage refused to lose another. "I'm beside you every step of the way." "No," she said. staring blankly out into the yard. "That's not it." "Then what?" Gage pleaded. "Tell me." She looked at him, tears sparkling in her eyes, even as she gave him a radiant smile. "I'm pregnant." "What?" Now it was his turn to stare at her. "How?" Kylie gave a small snort. "The usual way, I suppose. We haven't been using protection because I never thought this would happen." Gage stood and walked a few paces away, trying to wrap his head around the news. In his heart, he'd always prayed for a miracle like this, but never in a million years had he expected it to happen. He loved Kylie, just as she was. Would have been perfectly content and happy to spend the rest of his days with her and the twins in their own version of happily ever after. But now, holy crap! Gage was pretty sure his whoops of joy could be heard clear across the county. He rushed back over to wrap his arms around Kylie and picked her up, twirling her around, mindful of both her condition and the grill nearby, then set her down and kissed her. A baby. Our baby. Wow. It was then that he noticed she didn't seem as happy about the news as he did. His gut nosedived to his toes. Maybe this wasn't what she wanted. "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" She moved out of his arms and over to stand by the picnic table again. "No, I'm happy. I'm just shocked, I guess. And a little scared. I mean, what if I can't handle this?" "Of course you can handle it, baby. Look at what a fantastic job you've done with the twins. They're doing amazing." He joined her at the table. "You're one of the bravest people I know." "I don't feel like it most times." She shrugged and sniffled. "I remember talking to my sister about it one time, about how challenging it was to watch all my friends have kids, including her, and me just sitting there, alone. In fact, I'll bet that's one of the reasons why she didn't make me the twins' guardian. She didn't want to overwhelm me. She would have wanted to make sure I was emotionally prepared. But what if I'm not? What if I never will be?" Tentatively, not wanting to spook her, Gage took her hand again. "Baby, if anyone has fears about being emotionally prepared, it's me. Until you came along, I wondered if I'd ever be able to connect with anyone, including the twins. But then you showed me how to live life in love with my whole heart. You taught me to loosen up and take experiences as they happen. You are the most loving, capable woman I've ever met. I love you and we can do this. Together. Trust me. Can we?" Kylie met his eyes, her lovely gaze filled with a mix of hope and apprehension. "Yes, we can." He took her into his arms once more. "And I think if Christine was here now, she'd say the same thing. This is a miracle, Kylie. Our very own miracle. We'll get through this, I promise. No matter what happens, we'll get through this." "A baby." She gave him a watery smile, then took his hand and placed it on her still flat tummy, covering it with hers. "Our baby. I love you, Gage Winters. And I love you, Kylie Fredericks." He rested his forehead against hers, his throat tight. "And whenever you're ready, I say we make it official. Are you asking me to marry you?" She reached up and cupped his cheek. "Are you going to say yes?" He kissed her palm, then leaned in to kiss her lips. "I think maybe I am," she said, laughing. "What do you say to that?" "I say woohoo." He picked her up and kissed her again, then set her down and took her hand. "Right. Now, let's go tell the twins the good news, eh?"